Good morning and welcome to the public hearing and public meeting of August 4th, 2026. We'll be taking
Commissioner Chu,
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson. Here. Commissioner Mahan,
Here.
Commissioner Wilder.
Here.
Today's public hearing and public meeting is being held in person at LPC's hearing room on the second floor of 253 Broadway. It is also being held via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube for anyone who would like to participate remotely or watch the proceedings. Our agenda today includes a public meeting agenda for applications for work on designated properties that have already had a public hearing and for which we've already heard testimony and are back today with revisions in response to our comments at the hearing, and a public hearing agenda for new applications for work on designated properties. And with that, I will turn it over to Corey Harala, Director of Preservation, for our first public hearing item.
Thank you, Chair Kursavage, and good morning, everyone. We'll start today's Preservation Department public hearing agenda with item number 1, LPC 26-09534, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn, Block 436, Lot 66, 309 President Street in the Carroll Gardens Historic District. This is a row house built in 1876, and the application is to reconstruct and modify the rear facade and construct a rear yard addition and a shed.
Hi, good morning. My name is Marco Pinheiro. I'm a registered architect with Studio PHH Architecture, and I'm here to discuss 309 President Street. So here you can see our site on the north side of the Carroll Gardens Historic District. The rear yard is at the boundary, so the other properties on the other side of the rear yard are not in the historic district. And we are proposing to do a rear extension, replace the entirety of the rear facade, and add a storage shed in the rear yard. Here's some historic photos of the front facade. We'll be replacing the front facade stucco in kind and replicating the historic details. Here in our site section and site plan, you could see the extent of the rear extension and the replication of the existing masonry bay at the rear on the first 2 floors, the basement and the first floor, sorry. As we look at the block plan, you can see that we are in a row with a number of townhouses that have the rear bay. There's a precedent at 305A where they did a 2-story rear extension and replicated the bay. And more than 50% of the row houses on the block have rear extensions. The photo on the left shows the existing conditions of the rear facade, and the image on the right is the townhouse that I mentioned, 305A, that has the rear extension and replaced the brick on the whole facade. They did a vertical extension, which we are not proposing. Here you can see the dimensions of the extension. So it's 4'10" with the 4'4" bay to replicate the existing. On our elevations, you can see that we are replacing the masonry at the whole rear facade. We are keeping the proportions of the 3rd floor windows and trying to reuse the existing bluestone headers where we can. This is showing the existing conditions, some of the headers. Currently, the existing facade is painted. We've done tests to try to remove the paint to see if we could reuse the bricks at the rear, and we've had difficulty finding a color that will fit aesthetically with the proposed brick. And so we're proposing new brick on the whole facade. Here are some measurements of the existing opening. So we're keeping the proportions, keeping the distances to the property lines, and the distances between windows and replicating the brick cornice detail at the top. Here again, the precedent at 305A. Here showing the proposed bluestone headers and sills that we will try to reuse. Some of the existing headers are cracked, so we can't reuse them. And then at the rear property line, we are proposing a shed that's 7'10" tall. The shed siding will be a TimberTech PVC cladding with a metal roof. And some additional images of the 305A property, which has similar sheds at the rear. Thank you.
Commissioners, do we have any questions? Commissioner Ginsburg?
Why are you replacing the facade in the rear on those top two floors? Do you have like a structural engineer saying that it's unstable or not salvageable?
So at the second floor, we are enlarging the window. And then speaking with contractors, it was more an ease of means and methods and partially an aesthetic preference of the clients to have a matching brick across the whole facade.
So what you're telling me is structurally what is there could be reused.
Structurally, what is there could be reused.
Thank you.
correct.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Let's move to testimony. Is there anybody in the room that would like to testify on this item? Okay, not seeing any. Let's move to Stephen Thompson, Director of Intergovernmental and Community Affairs for Zoom testimony.
Those participating via Zoom who wish to speak, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, I will note for the record that Brooklyn Community Board 6 recommends approval on the condition the brick soldier courses above the rear elevation windows with stone lintels match the original details and those on other adjacent rear yard facades.
Okay, would you like to respond to that testimony from the community board?
Yes, we originally had soldier course headers, and we are trying to use the bluestone where we can. If we can't reuse the existing bluestone, we're going to find new bluestone to use at the headers.
Any final questions? Commissioner Jefferson?
Am I missing something are you excavating the basement?
No, we are not.
Or not? Okay.
And Commissioners, this is just one other note on the shed, which is part of this proposal. You don't see a lot of these. We sometimes do them at staff level. This one appears to have a poured concrete sort of slab that it sits upon. So while the shed itself is modest, I think it's less than 8 feet tall, maybe something like 5'8" footprint, and therefore not much taller than a typical fence line. We do typically ask if, for example, one were to excavate the rear yard, that they hold off that last 5 feet so that a mature tree could grow there. So this is not exactly that. It's certainly a much smaller footprint and could be removed in the future, but it was close enough that the staff wasn't sure about it. So we were just kind of looking for any input on that specifically. And it may be in the future that smaller ones like this, we still do at staff level. But if you did have any thoughts on that, we'd be happy to hear them.
Okay, any final questions? Okay, not seeing any. Let's close the hearing and start our discussion. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Quimby, would you second the motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The hearing is closed. So Commissioners, this is an application to reconstruct and modify the rear facade, construct a rear yard addition, and as Corey mentioned, a shed. The proposed addition, which isn't visible, recalls the existing bay window and is similar to another approved addition on this block. The applicant is requesting to reconstruct the rear wall, which the commission typically approves when the wall is found not to be in sound condition, though that might not be the case here, as we've heard. The commission also has approved combining openings at floors below the top floor, as we see proposed here on the third floor. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you start the discussion?
Yeah. So in general, this is fairly simple. I think what they're proposing is reasonable, ties into what's been done on other rear facades, and is appropriate besides, unless they can show that the top two floors of the facade can't be salvaged. So I've worked with staff on that. They should keep that the existing historic fabric. It looks like they can strip the paint off if they want to expose the brick. But I think they should do that. I think the shed is fine. And it would be good if it was staff level, but in this case, I don't see it as an issue, and it means they'll keep the detritus of the rear yard out of the rear yard and in the shed, one would hope. So with that one modification, I can find this appropriate.
Commissioner Quimby.
Likewise, I'm fine with the shed. What is being proposed is modest, and it has been already done on the block. I agree with Commissioner Ginsburg that the upper floors should be maintained, and actually enlarging the opening on the second floor is fine.
Commissioner Chen?
I'm in agreement with the other two commissioners.
Commissioner Chu?
I'm also in agreement.
Commissioner Jefferson?
Agreement.
Commissioner Goldblum? Okay. Commissioner Mann?
I concur.
And Commissioner Wilder?
I agree.
And Vice Chair Master?
I agree.
Okay, so Commissioner Ginsburg, could you read the motion with
Yep.
your language?
With regards to LPC 26-09-534-309 President Street, Carroll Gardens Historic District. A row house built in 1876. Application is to reconstruct and modify the rear facade and construct a rear yard addition and a shed. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Carroll Gardens Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed rooftop addition will not be visible from any public. Is there a rooftop addition? No. Okay. The faceted profile of the two-story height of the chamfered rear yard addition featuring brick cladding with punched openings will recall the scale and character of the original bay while maintaining the original upper floor of the row house and its relationship to the rest of the row. That the depth of the addition will be consistent with the varying projections of existing rear extensions on the block, only half of which is in the historic district, and that the proposed addition will not diminish the central green space. That the proposed fenestration at the rear yard addition will retain the same general shape and pattern as the historic openings, and that the enlarged opening at the second floor will be in keeping with other rear facades in the row while maintaining the existing masonry outer piers. That the proposed wood rear yard shed is modest in size and design, will be set along a portion of the rear lot line and is in keeping with typical utilitarian garden structures and will not significantly alter the relationship of the yard to the neighboring yards. That the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the Carroll Gardens Historic District. However, I find that the structural engineer has found the upper floors of the rear facade to be in sound condition. Therefore, there is not sufficient evidence to support its reconstruction. Therefore, I recommend that the upper floor of the rear facade be retained and repaired.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Quimby, could you second the motion?
Second.
And Mark, could you please call the vote?
Chair Savage,
Aye.
Vice Chair Master,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, you abstain, Commissioner Quimby,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson, Commissioner Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilder.
Aye.
With 9 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention, the motion passes.
Okay, and we're going to just pause here for a couple minutes to get set up for the public meeting. Okay, let's move to our first public meeting item. Corey?
Right, that's public meeting item number 1, LPC 26-02776, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1217, Lot 1, 165 West 86th Street, the West Park Presbyterian Church, individual landmark. This is a Romanesque revival-style church complex designed by Henry Franklin Kilburn and built in 1889 to 1890, which incorporated an existing chapel designed by Leopold Eidlitz and built in 1883 to 1885. The application is to demolish the building pursuant to Section 25-309B2 on the grounds of hardship. This was last discussed at the public meeting of June 23rd, 2026. No action was taken at that time.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to read through a statement. Okay. Do we want? Okay.
That was the plan.
Oh, okay. Okay, pardon me. So this is an application by the West Park Presbyterian Church requesting demolition of their church building on the grounds of hardship. Today's public meeting will be a discussion among the commissioners and follows on the December 9th, 2025 public hearing and public meetings on March 10th, May 5th, and June 28th, 2026. No vote will be called today. I first want to start with some introductory remarks on what we are and what we are not considering. As LPC's General Counsel, Mark Silberman, has previously explained, we are reviewing this application under the hardship provision of the Landmarks Law. The hardship provisions are a constitutional safeguard that protects the validity of the law itself and addresses the owner's legal rights. It is a necessary part of the law that seeks to ensure that the application of the Landmarks Law doesn't result in an economic hardship that could be deemed an illegal taking under the New York and federal constitutions. Hardship applications are very rare, and there have only been 23 such applications across all types of landmarks since the Landmarks Law was adopted 60 years ago. And we've approved 13 of those applications. The hardship provision does not address the historic value of the building. There is no doubt that this is an architecturally and historically significant church building. The Commission isn't considering de-designation or anything related to the church's significance. None of that is at issue. In fact, the demolition of the building is inherently inappropriate, and that is why this is being considered under the hardship provision. We are also not considering the value or preservation of a vibrant and affordable arts center in the church. There's no doubt that there are many passionate supporters of the Center for West Park, and at our public hearing and in a substantial amount of written testimony, we have heard that the center has great value to many on the Upper West Side and to the larger New York City arts community. What is before us is that the West Park Presbyterian Church is claiming that it cannot afford to maintain its church and parish house due to the significant cost to repair the exterior and address structural issues. They claim the church has exhausted all of its financial resources in trying to maintain the building. It is seeking a determination of hardship on the grounds that the maintenance of the building imposes a hardship on the small congregation. I'm now going to talk a little bit about the background on LPC's review of the application. So as I mentioned, we have had one public hearing and 3 public meetings on this item. At the hearing, we heard from the applicant and their experts and also had more than 5 hours of public testimony. And we received a very substantial amount of written testimony throughout the process. In particular, the Center at West Park and their legal representation has submitted extensive information, along with their various other experts. All of that information, including what was sent before the record closed, was provided to the commissioners as it was received. Hardship applications address issues that the commission doesn't typically review. To help us in this process, LPC relied on 3 independent expert consultants who have not only reviewed the applicant's materials, but also relevant opposition submissions. And I'm going to talk about the 3 consultants and what the work they've done on behalf of the commission independently. Weitzman Associates is a nationally known independent appraisal and real estate advisory services firm that has been in business for over 45 years, and the firm has special expertise in New York City. And Weitzman analyzed the applicant's economic materials as well as relevant materials from the opposition to advise the commission on the economic analysis. Old Structures Engineering brings award-winning technical expertise, responding to complex challenges in all aspects related to historical and existing building projects. And Old Structures provided updated analysis on the building's structural and exterior physical condition and recommended scope work to address the conditions. And then finally, Metropolis Group is a privately owned code, zoning, and expediting firm that serves all aspects of the real estate and construction industry, and Metropolis provided additional guidance to the commission. At the public hearing and meetings, commissioners have asked many questions of the applicant and LPC's consultants on matters of law. We have been guided by LPC's general counsel, Mark Silberman. Today, we will have a discussion on the 4 factors of the statutory hardship test. We will rely on our own review of all of the materials and the guidance we have received. And of course, we will be tapping into the commissioner's own expertise. This is the opportunity to discuss any open issues on any of the 4 factors. But before we get started on discussing each factor, I want to provide a summary of some of the baseline facts related to the church, LPC's designation, the church's subsequent efforts to fund repairs for the building, and the creation of the center. The West Park Presbyterian Church congregation built their ornate church building in 1890, and it has worshiped there ever since. There's little dispute over the fact that the church has struggled with the maintenance issues of the building and made many efforts to address those issues. In 2001, the Department of Buildings required a sidewalk shed to be installed around the property due to the debris falling from the stone facade. Because of the ongoing issues related to spalling stone, the sidewalk shed has remained ever since, 25 years after it was installed. Sorry. Prior to the landmark designation in 2010, the congregation has twice explored partnering with a developer to redevelop the building for residential and church use. The congregation had already vacated the building in anticipation of development moving forward when the commission began considering the building for designation, and at that time, that developer walked away from the deal. The congregation strenuously opposed designation because of the alleged financial strain caused by maintaining the building. Ultimately, the commission designated the building over the congregation's opposition. During the designation process, there were promises of help to raise funds from the local council member and the neighbors and other local groups. According to the submissions, these efforts did not result in significant donations, if any, after the designation. The record indicates that the congregation spent considerable funds to repair the building and make it usable for reoccupation after it was designated. The congregation sold its only two significant assets to try and maintain the building and support itself. In January 2010, right about the time of the designation, the congregation sold an apartment it owned for $450,000. In 2013 or 2014, it sold its manse, which is its pastor's residence, for $1.3 million, using the proceeds to pay for the sidewalk shed, make repairs, and cover its operating and church-related expenses. Between designation and the decision to sell the building, the congregation spent significant funds to repair and maintain the building. As a result of the declining number of congregants and the cost to maintain the building, the congregation let its pastor go in 2017. In addition, the record contains lots of information about the church's other efforts to address the costs associated with maintaining the building. Between 2010 and 2013, the congregation sought to find a tenant or partner to help with the building. It hired Cushman & Wakefield to market the property. It had conversations with a lot of nonprofits, including the Marymount School and Joffrey Ballet, but nothing came of those efforts because the cost of repairs and maintenance was too high. It undertook fundraisers and applied for some grants. The church began renting out portions of the building to a variety of community and religious organizations, making approximately $60,000 in rent in 2014, which increased to $290,000 in 2016 when the center took over. In 2016 to 2017, it created the Center at West Park, an independent nonprofit that was supposed to manage and maintain the property and seek funding that would otherwise be unavailable to the church. The congregation and the center signed a 5-year lease in early 2018 with an option to extend the contract for an additional 5-year term. The church subsidized the center by signing all the rent from the building to the center, and the center took over managing and maintaining the building and paid the church a small rent between $27,000 and $32,000 per year. The center had an obligation to try and raise funds for the repair of the exterior. The center was slow to get up and running, and by 2020, the congregation, now down to 12, felt the partnership wasn't working and it wasn't making enough money to cover its obligations and voted to sell the church. After a search, the church settled on Alchemy. Alchemy looked at a partial demolition and other adaptive reuse options, but concluded that none were economically viable. The church agrees to sell the property to Alchemy for $33 million in cash, and Alchemy would build out a new church facilities on the ground floor worth about $10 million. In January 2022, the congregation informed the center the option to renew the lease at the end of 2022 violated the Religious Corporation Law and was invalid, but the center exercised its right under the lease to renew. The congregation and the session voted to approve the sale to Alchemy in March and April 2022, and the hardship was filed in April. Should be noted, at the end of 2022, the center had a cash flow deficit of $106,423, and its net assets in the Form 990 were negative $227,755, and the congregation had $28,000 in the bank. Okay, now we're going to talk about the first factor, and since that factor relies heavily on legal interpretation, I'm going to ask Mark Silberman to review the factor and the related facts. Mark?
Thank you. The first factor requires two things: that the owner and the applicant have entered into a bona fide agreement to sell the property, and secondly, that the agreement is subject to or contingent upon the issuance of a notice to proceed in this case. As part of the hardship application to demolish the building, the congregation has submitted a signed contract with Alchemy to sell the property. The contract appears to be an arm's length transaction and thus a bona fide agreement, and nobody disputes this conclusion. The second requirement is that the contract is subject to or contingent upon the issuance of a notice to proceed. A notice to proceed is what you would issue, we being the commission, if you've determined there is a hardship. Simply put, is this contract between the church and Alchemy to sell the West Park property subject to or contingent upon the approval of your finding a hardship? Under the terms of the contract, the congregation is obligated to provide the notice to proceed to Alchemy prior to the closing. If the congregation cannot provide a notice to proceed because we deny the hardship, Alchemy is not obligated to close and can walk away from the deal. However, in this instance, the contract allows Alchemy to waive that requirement and the deal can close anyway, even if you deny the hardship. Alchemy has absolute discretion to decide whether to waive the requirement or not. The congregation asserts this satisfies the contingency requirement, arguing that the language in the contract clearly requires the church to obtain a notice to proceed, and if it cannot, allows a purchaser to walk away from the deal. The center argues the contract is not subject to or contingent if the condition can be waived. The center argues that the contingency requirement requires the contract to become null and void if the hardship is not granted, because the contingency requirement exists to, quote, ensure that any hardship involving a nonprofit be a true hardship, close quote, but never explains what a true hardship is. I see no policy rationale that supports the center's view. The point of the contingency requirement is to underscore the difficulty of trying to sell a designated property that the parties believe might not be capable of yielding a reasonable return. That doesn't mean the property cannot be sold. It might mean that property cannot be sold at this price, but the sales price has no relevance to the hardship test. It should be noted that the contingency factor appears in only one other place in the hardship test, and that's during the 180-day period after the commission issues a preliminary determination of hardship, where you are looking to find an alternative purchaser who will agree to purchase the property on reasonably similar terms and conditions, except that purchaser must close without the issuance of a notice to proceed. Since Alchemy has complete discretion whether to close or not, I believe the church has satisfied the first factor because this contract is subject to and contingent upon the issuance of a notice to proceed. And I'm happy to answer any questions, commissioners.
Commissioners, are there any questions or comments on the first factor? Commissioner Jefferson.
The church has testified that it has a very small congregation, numbering fewer than 20 people. In the event that the congregation closes altogether or falls below a governance number, what is the plan for ownership and leadership succession? Does it affect factor one?
I don't think it affects factor one. That the factor one concerns the contract between the parties, and there's a valid contract now, a contract that's been approved by the larger presbytery. So I don't believe that the question of at what moment in time the congregation exists under the laws of the presbytery are relevant to that question. I would point out that right now, as I understand it, it's a functioning and valid congregation pursuant to the information in the record, and that they have asked that the administrative commission be the one that is managing operations.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other questions or comments on factor one. I'm going to suggest we move to Commissioner Goldblum.
I'm sorry. Just explain to me a little bit, and forgive my ignorance on this, is the notion of the contingency. The church, basically, the contingency is that Alchemy can choose to not consummate the deal, even if there's a finding of hardship. Is that the problem? And the center is saying that invalidates the.
No, it's the opposite. The contract is clear that if the hardship is granted and all the other conditions and requirements of the contract are satisfied, there must be a closing. So the issue
thing that contingency is that because there's an if in there related to us, that's what undermines the entire agreement.
Well, I think that, in fairness, what they would argue is that because, so just backing up for a second. So the way the contract works now is that the church is required to provide the notice to proceed. Okay, and if it doesn't, then the Alchemy can choose not to close. And the center's view is that that doesn't make it contingent, the contract contingent, because it grants the discretion to Alchemy on whether to close or not. And so their view is simply that. And when I ask the question of what's the policy behind a rule that would be so, because it seems like it is contingent on its face, they don't have to close, and the policy, according to the center, seems to be that there's no true hardship if if Alchemy were, for example, to choose to close anyway. But I'm not sure what that really means, because the hardship, of course, is can it make a reasonable return? Can it still function? That's what the ultimate policy of the hardship provision is to make sure that the application of the law itself isn't imposing an economic burden. Excuse me. Okay, it's not. Yeah.
So,
And the center's arguments were extensively, set forth in their papers.
okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the second factor. And Mark's going to start with a description of what it is, and then I will provide additional information.
So the second factor of the fourth factor hardship test in the statute requires the applicant to demonstrate that, quote, the improvement parcel, which includes such improvement as existing at the time of the filing of the request, would not, if it were not exempt in whole or in part from real property taxation, be capable of earning a reasonable return, close quote. In other words, the applicant, and this is relying on definitions that I've gone through before, the applicant must demonstrate that the net annual return of earned income yielded by the property during the test year, after deducting for certain specified operating expenses, is less than 6% of the assessed value of the property, assuming the property is prudently and efficiently managed. The test year in this application is the 12-month period prior to the filing of the hardship, which is September 2024 through August 2025. It should be stressed the reasonable return is a projected annual return. In other words, it is intended to be a return that is reasonably certain to repeat itself in the foreseeable future. It is not the return only in the test year. The test year is supposed to be exemplary of what the property can yield into the future. This is presumably why the test uses the phrase earned income yielded by the property. As our expert appraiser testified, earned income in this context is rent and other known and recurring income streams yielded by the property. That is why it doesn't include the profits of a tenant or other non-recurring or unknown or intermittent sources of revenue.
Okay, for this discussion, I recommend that we rely on the work of our three consultants and their submissions. And I'm going to go through some information and then we can start a discussion. So first, starting with the applicant's four reasonable return scenarios. The applicant submitted reasonable return analysis for four development scenarios. These were the same scenarios analyzed by the applicant's appraiser in the first hardship, but resubmitted with with updated cost estimates and scopes of work. The scenarios are, number one, the existing building with the exterior repaired and the entire building brought up to current building codes, which is the base building scenario. Number two, the base building scope of work, plus adding a new floor in the sanctuary space to increase rentable floor area, which is the infill scenario. And numbers 3 and 4 are two different scenarios involving adaptively reusing the existing building for residential uses, which is the multifamily and mixed income scenarios. Each scenario assumed that there would be a single new tenant or owner of the building. The applicant provided extensive documentation of the costs of the work, operating costs, and market analysis for potential rents that could be achieved in each scenario. They found that none of the four scenarios generated a reasonable return. And then we had our consultant Weitzman analyze the four scenarios. And as you heard at the public meeting on May 5th, LPC's real estate advisor, Weitzman, analyzed the applicant's assumptions, cost projections, analysis, and approach, and as well as information submitted by the opponents of the application. Addressing issues related to concerns that the applicant's costs were too high, Weitzman also did a sensitivity analysis, assuming that repair costs were reduced to 75% and 50%, and determined that the base and infill scenarios still did not generate a reasonable return. In the end, Weitzman concurred with the applicant that the 4 scenarios could not yield a reasonable return. In addition, and separate from Weitzman's generic sensitivity analysis, our own consulting engineer developed a reduced scope of exterior work that would allow for the removal of the sidewalk shed. This scope included no interior upgrades to meet current codes. In the original 2022 application, the Commission's consulting engineer, Old Structures, reviewed the materials submitted by Facade MD and Severid Engineering on behalf of the church in the first hardship, and concluded that a, quote, reduced scope of work that relied on more repair work and less full replacement materials and phased over 5 to 7 years would cost approximately $1.7 million in immediate work, with a total cost of $7.3 million over the remaining years, for a total cost of around $9.1 million. In the hardship application, Old Structures reviewed the updated cost estimates and scope and confirmed its prior position, but agreed the costs would be increased due to inflation. In addition to the sensitivity analysis, Weitzman undertook a reasonable return analysis using the reduced scope of work scenario. In that scenario, the property would have to rent for $37.50 a square foot in order to cover the repair cost and yield a reasonable return, and he predicted that no rational market participant would rent the premises for that price, given the interior conditions and the non-compliant code issues that were not addressed in the reduced work scenario. Further, he found that even if an organization was willing to rent the building with the interior condition as is, it wouldn't pay more than $25 a square foot. Weitzman noted that the highest rental and box office income reported by the center was less than $23 in 2024. Weitzman concluded that the record supports a finding that the property cannot yield a reasonable return on any of the 4 main scenarios proposed by the church based on earned income yielded by the property and even with the reduced scope of work scenario. So there's a lot of analysis embedded into this conclusion, and I want to give commissioners a moment to respond. We're going to hold off on the transfer of development rights topic, but I'm going to start with Vice Chair Master.
Thank you, Lisa. So I also looked at this, and we're talking about the reasonable return analysis and the second factor. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts, which are similar to what Lisa had said as well. Starting out, I want to say that, I have a background, I think, that makes me well suited to discuss this. I have an MBA from Columbia University and more than a decade of experience in commercial real estate. I've worked on leasing and sales for nonprofit clients, including the JCC, Meals on Wheels, Pride Center, and Eden 2. So based on that experience, I believe I can offer a valuable perspective on this topic. So the question really is, do any of the 4 scenarios that Lisa outlined, can they yield a reasonable return? So the analysis begins with income that the property can earn. And typically what we're talking about there is rent. And then what we do is we subtract expenses such as management, maintenance, insurance, and a 2% depreciation allowance. So the result, the net operating income, is then divided by the assessed valuation, which is provided by the City of New York. And in this case, I think that's about $3.8 million. And then we determine the rate of return. So the church needs to prove that the property would not be capable of earning a reasonable return, which is 6%. The church presented 4 development scenarios and contends that none would yield a reasonable return. So really, the renovation costs, hold on just a second. Renovation costs are a critical factor in this analysis because they are included in the 2% depreciation allowance. High renovation costs make it difficult for any scenario to meet the 6% return threshold. So there was much discussion about whether these renovation costs were overstated. And I want to kind of talk about that because that's really the driving factor. Our LPC consultant, I think Cumming, who worked with Weitzman, reviewed the renovation costs submitted by the church, and they concluded that they were reasonable and consistent with market conditions. To confirm that repair costs were not overstated, our LPC consultant, Weitzman, performed additional analyses. They used 75% and then 50% of the total repair costs. And even with these substantially reduced renovation costs, the base and infill scenarios still did not meet the 6% return threshold. Weitzman then performed a reasonable return analysis using Friedman's $9.1 million estimate for limited scope exterior repairs only. So under this analysis, we're not doing any interior renovations of the building. So even under that 6% threshold, they did not, they weren't able to meet the 6% threshold unless rents were about $37 a square foot. Let's keep in mind that the center was previously paying under $3,000 a month, which is under $2 a square foot. And so $37 a square foot is getting us very close to market rate rents, what I would consider market rate rents. And so I don't believe that you can achieve $37 a square foot, close to market rate rents, without doing any interior renovations. Remember, the building is not at code. So a further question, and I think I'll address that a little bit later, about the interior renovations. A further question was whether the exterior renovation work could be done in phases. So in the near term, we would do minimal work, clear violations, get rid of the sidewalk shed. And as a realtor, I would recommend basically completing all exterior work at once rather than phasing it over time. A phased approach might be more realistic if the church occupied the building. However, a creditworthy tenant would likely object to major repairs recurring every few years, particularly if they disrupted their operations or programming. So in sum, the renovation costs presented were reasonable, as confirmed by LPC consultant Cumming, and Weitzman concluded that the church's reasonable return analysis and assumptions were rational and reflected market conditions, and I agree with that assessment.
Commissioners, are there any other comments on these points? No? Sure.
Second factor. As existing at the time of filing, right? Which means that the analysis of whether the building can or cannot return a profit is taken as existing at the time of filing, which I guess would be 2025. So why are we considering any scenarios? In other words, none of them were existing in 2025.
I think because the commission has, I mean, it's an important question, and the commission has in the past sort of looked to see whether the property, if used differently, could generate a reasonable return. And that requirement that you cite, that the building as it exists is, what it goes on to say, as it exists, is presumed to be the earning capacity of the property unless there are substantial grounds for a different consideration. In the past, the commission has not wanted to limit itself just to what the particular applicant is doing or owner at a given time, but also look at whether you could increase rents or increase revenue with additional investment. And so, and the center raised this issue, and the center wanted to focus the attention primarily on the building as it exists. And I think that is in fact what happened during the except for the initial hearing, most of the testimony and conversation about the reasonable return analysis has focused almost exclusively on the building as it exists now, with the one caveat that the sidewalk shed has to come down, and the exterior conditions have to get fixed. So that is in fact what we have looked at, is basically scenario one with a reduced scope of work is what the vast majority of the testimony has involved.
So if that's the case, why did they present and why are we discussing options 2, 3, and 4?
They presented it, I think, to show that even if you invested and tried to adaptively reuse the building, it wouldn't work. And as you may recall, the testimony earlier on in the proceeding was that when they first hired Alchemy, Alchemy's job was to try to find an adaptive reuse of the building. They've testified that that was too expensive, but I think that's why they proposed those things. We didn't require them to propose.
So let's say that they proposed one. Let's say they proposed a scenario. Let's say 3, and they turned out that 3 worked. Would we then have grounds, in your view, to deny the hardship, even though scenario 3 involved a significant investment and a consideration by this commission for what would certainly be a C of A?
I think that's a good question, and I think we haven't, since none of those factors, in fact, none of the scenarios did provide a reasonable return, I don't think we have to reach that question. But I think it's an interesting question, and I would argue that depending on the kinds of changes that were required, the commission might be able to deny that application.
Because the reason that I'm picking on this particular issue is that I thought that the scenarios were kind of preloaded to fail. And that I thought that they missed the most obvious one, which is the one that we've seen in the city a number of times, which is a partial new construction on a part of the site and the preservation of other parts of the site. Granted, that would not be a slam dunk. They'd have to come to us and it'd have to be approved or whatever. But if one's doing a kind of comps analysis of buildings of this type that have been modified under Landmark's approval, that is the most common type that I'm aware of. And if in fact that were to pencil out, which I mean, I could see a scenario where that might be the case, looking at other buildings around the city. If we should be considering that in this factor, then I think we should certainly pursue it or ask our consultants to pursue it so that we have an idea. Because if we were to find out that what we would determine to be a reasonable, normal scenario that's approved at Landmarks in a number of cases were to work here financially, and if that were to be determined as sufficient to deny the hardship, I think we should pursue it.
So it's my view on that a partial demolition and construction of new building is clearly outside the scope of the building as it exists today. And I think that, as I indicated earlier, possibly within the scope would be putting, 25 new windows in the building and keeping the building basically as it is and trying to squeeze in apartments. So that I can't guarantee that would win the day, but I think we would have a good chance of winning that case. So I think that the analysis that you're saying that we should be requiring them to propose an alternative that involves partial demolition, the law doesn't require that. The law is looking at the building as it exists, I think, for a reason. And the other practical reality is there are only 1,000 different versions of what that partial demolition could look like. And I think it's, the commission can't look at that. We're not doing a C of A per se. I mean, if they came in and asked for a C of A for a partial demolition, for example, and we denied it, they could seek a hardship based on that. Okay, but the law leaves that up to them.
I mean, okay. Additional things. Okay. the test year is an important component of this factor, right? And the test year in this case is 2024. And the test year.
No, actually, the test year is 2024 to 2025. Right?
Sorry. So I think that the history of this particular saga shows that that was hardly a standard year. It was the year when the, correct me if I'm getting the facts wrong, the church was in the process of evicting the center, and there were legal battles on that score. And it was the year that the center happened to have a pretty good income. And it was the year that the center applied to try to do work to remedy the building, but was disabled from doing so by the church. How could that be considered an exemplary year? I mean, and the fact that again, correct me if I'm getting the facts wrong, but the fact that the center was being evicted and that eviction would eventually be successful was taken in the documentation to be a reason for discounting some of their situation in considering the test year. How should we be looking at the test year if it was such an outlier on so many factors? It wasn't exemplary. Oh, sorry. So punt.
How it is. Okay. So
Do it next time. Fine.
should we
Yeah,
do?
why not?
Sure.
Let's move on to that point. And then we can sort of have a baseline and then I'll talk about that same point. So, getting to some of the criticism of the reasonable return analysis, there is that point that this is phrased a little bit differently than you are saying it, Commissioner Goldblum. There's a question of whether the fact that the center generated a $1.2 million profit by the end of 2024 indicates the property can yield a reasonable return. In other words, is there a reasonable return if one includes the alleged profit sharing and additional rent? So as explained by Weitzman, earned income generally refers to the recurring income derived directly from the property, such as rents. That forms the basis of determining the earning capacity of the property. So profits of a tenant are not earned income yielded by the property because they are generated by the tenant's business, not the property. So in addition, they are variable and not recurring. So Weitzman's analysis suggested that the center's profits are not earned income yielded by the property, but rather income of the center's programming and fundraising, and therefore not part of a reasonable return.
And just to go back to answer your question specifically, I think what the law the test year is meant to be exemplary. And so that's why the statute says we're going to look to that year and presume that it demonstrates the earning capacity of the property, unless there are substantial grounds to think differently. And I think what you've pointed out is there are substantial grounds to think differently, because I think the situation here is quite unusual. You have a situation where, again, as you described it, there's a holdover tenant, there's litigation, the tenant is paying X in rent, but it's making money and fundraising in other ways. And so I think in some ways the answer to that question is that's why in this case, given this very complex, formerly intimate, now antagonistic relationship between these two parties, that it's best to look at the market rate and to go back to sort of fall back on what, Weitzman was looking at is, okay, let's look at this more generically. What would a typical market tenant sort of expect and want, and what are they willing to pay?
Got that. But this being a very unique situation, I mean, every old building is a unique situation. But this particular unique situation, a lot of the conversation that, about the market versus this particular story hinges on just what you're talking about, that antagonistic, formerly intimate relationship. If the point of the law is to see, can the building sustain itself, right? Why should we not look at the particulars of that building, even if they're weird, right? I mean, you have this weird situation. I mean, should we automatically discount the entire center church story and just look at this as if it were a storefront down the block? I'm not clear as to why, just because it's unusual, should that automatically make it not worth considering? And if it is worth considering, then how should we consider that, given the specificities, going to the root of the question?
It's the heart of the matter in this application. So I'll just say that there are two things that we're considering here, and that much of what you're talking about, I believe Lisa will be asking us to talk about in the third factor. Okay, I just want to stress that what we're talking about here, and this is a little bit of a preface to what I was going to say in the third factor, but there are two different analyses going on here. Factor 2 is really looking at the market and the reasonable return and what's happening now, right? Given this situation, it's focused on earned income. It's very specific and seeks to find, what is the annualized, net income going forward yielded by the property. And the factor 3, it's a much more holistic view, and the particulars of the center and the church's relationship is more relevant to the discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Excuse me, before we move to the issue of transfer development rights, any other comments where we are?
Yeah,
Commissioner
thank
Mann?
you. I thought I would just follow up on that point and, note that the relationship of the center to both factors 2 and 3 is something I've also struggled with quite a bit. And, factor 2 being the reasonable return, and factor 3 kind of having two different aspects. One being the financial suitability or appropriateness for carrying out, their mission. And, as I understand it, a factor 2, as Mark noted, is really about the market. Is there, a generic tenant that could, rent this church building, and thereby the church generate a reasonable return? And the involvement of the center in factor 2 appears to sort of obfuscate and confuse that issue, because they're not a generic tenant that can be found in the market by definition. They were created by the church specifically to attempt to raise funds and presumably avoid this situation in the first place, as I understand it. And so, the argument that the existence of the center and their and the success that they testify they have had in later years appears in my view, as I understand the law and the factors, to be more significant in factor 3, which is more personal, to the building. Even so, if one were to consider them in factor 2, which I find to be questionable, the analyses provided by Weitzman and others, appears to show that there still wouldn't be a reasonable return, if I understand it correctly. So just wanted to share those thoughts in response to what your good questions, Commissioner
Yeah,
Goldblum.
Lisa, also, can I add something else I think this applies to factor 2. And one of the questions that brings up is, what does a landlord typically look for when they're looking for kind of a strong tenant. And maybe I'll share a little bit of my thoughts there because that might be applicable. Like, is the center a typical tenant? And is that kind of what we'd look for? So let me talk about kind of the factors that a landlord would typically look for when evaluating a tenant. So landlords generally look for financially stable tenants that can pay rent throughout the lease term. So to make that determination, they would probably look at several key factors. The first is the financial strength of the tenant. A tenant should be able to demonstrate meaningful cash reserves or financial assets. So something like pledges, loans, or highly restricted grants would be closely scrutinized by a landlord and may not be accepted as evidence of strong financial assets. The second thing that they would probably look for is revenue history. A landlord would also look for a strong and stable financial history. So they would look at the 990 filings and look for a consistent track record of revenue. So in the center's case, I reviewed the last 5 years of 990 filings, which showed highly variable revenue. Net income was negative in 2019, 2020, and 2022. After the West Park lease was terminated in 2022, net income was positive in 2023 and 2024, driven largely by increased fundraising. The center raised approximately $350,000 in 2022, nearly $1 million in 2023, and $2.5 million in 2024, which is our test case year. A third factor that landlords would look at is funding sources, right, for a nonprofit. They would look at the source and the reliability of the tenant's funding. For example, if the grant funding is coming from a city, state, federal sources, what is the term of the grant and how likely is it to be renewed? So the goal is to determine whether the funding is stable enough to support the lease for its full term. So here again, I think fundraising is generally not viewed as a strong and steady funding source because of its variability. And then the fourth thing that I think the landlords would consider is tenant credibility. So a landlord would also consider tenant's credibility, including the party's history, whether the tenant has fulfilled past commitments. So I think in this situation, litigation history would be a factor that the landlord would think about before they decided whether to enter a lease agreement with the tenant.
How does it can you talk more about that? About I mean, there's a lot of nonprofits in New York City. The thought I had was like WNYC, like
No, but
100%
so
don't. How do
fundraising,
they
yeah.
get a lease?
So what they do is we would look at the 990s and they raise a certain level of money every year. And you know that. And you would look at their history. For the last 5 years, how much did they raise? And you know that they're going to continue to raise. So yes, I do think fundraising is a factor, but they would look at the history and make sure that there's a track record of fundraising at a certain level.
Any other comments at this time? We could move to the transfer of development rights. Okay, let's move on. So another point of criticism of the reasonable return analysis is that it didn't adequately include the potential value of transferring development rights. West Park Presbyterian Church is underbuilt with approximately 85,500 square feet of unused development rights. These are theoretically available for sale and transfer to adjacent properties. So potential receiving sites make them very unlikely to become development sites in the foreseeable future. These constraints include the need to assemble a site existing uses on potential sites, including rental apartments with rent-stabilized tenants or co-ops that are unlikely to agree to expansion due to construction and other impacts, and sliver sites that are unlikely to want to build taller given financial and other constraints. And
Excuse me, we've been lost on Zoom. You want to turn your,
sorry, we're holding for a technical issue. Can you hear me? Okay. Should I repeat anything or just keep going?
I think just keep going.
Okay. Apologies if I dropped off for a moment, but and I think I was at sliver sites that are unlikely to want to build taller given financial and other constraints. Finally, with respect to buildings buying TDRs for a small rooftop addition, due to a small amount of TDRs used in each case, there would have to be multiple sales in a short period of time to have any meaningful impact on the reasonable return analysis. So commissioners, and Mark's going to talk also about sort of another issue, but just in terms of the viability of TDRs, does anybody have any thoughts or comments, questions? Commissioner Mayhem?
Sure. This is a point which I think, there's a number of architects on the commission, and, many of us have dealt with developments which utilize TDRs. So, I think several of us understand, how they are transferred and assembled on a site, even if we've not been on the selling side of the table. And I understand that, there's a relatively new change to the zoning resolution, the 7542. And what that does is it enlarges the potential catchment area, increasing the number of potential sites for a transfer. It does not change, the underlying viability of any particular site for development. So it doesn't change, right, the underlying geometry of the site, the underlying zoning of the site, the underlying math. And so, in my view, this is well analyzed as well by our consultants. There really doesn't appear to be a viable receiving site, at least in the foreseeable future. That certainly not one that would make a change to the reasonable return scenario, for all the various constraints that you just outlined, Chair Kersavage. So I think, given those constraints of the immediate surrounding neighborhood, I thought that point was fairly clearly made to me, and as an architect, fairly clear to see that there was not an obvious receiving site in the foreseeable future, unless there's some, unforeseen significant, change to development and zoning in the immediate neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Master.
Yeah, I would also like to jump in. I want to agree with Commissioner Mayhen's comments and say that 7542, in addition to increasing the number of receiving sites, it also simplified the process
Right.
of getting air rights. So the church has approximately 80,000 square feet of available air rights. And let me give you more of a realtor perspective on that. So TDRs have value only when there is a viable receiving site with a specific development need. I don't feel that marketing TDRs can create demand because the pool of eligible receiving sites is so limited, and timing really depends on the conditions and development plans of those receiving sites. Developers who use TDRs are aware of available air rights and typically approach sellers directly. For that reason, I do not believe marketing the church's TDRs would have a meaningful impact. These TDRs do have probably a longer term value But in the near term, the church's air rights have little value. There is also no secondary market for TDR options at this point.
Commissioner Ginsburg?
I'd like to add, my dealings with TDRs are where a client looks at us and said, could we get some TDRs from an adjacent site? And we do an analysis. And if it makes sense, they'll then approach the potential seller to discuss it. So agreeing with what's been said. The other thing I'd add is TDRs are quite complicated to do. I mean, not only would need the report from on the condition and how to repair the historic building, but there are legal documents that have to be filed with DOB, et cetera, to document the transfer so that somebody doesn't sell their air rights twice, et cetera. So doing a number of small transfers is often not economically viable. And that just makes it more complicated.
Any other comments? We'll move on to actually the point that both of you just made, which was, whether precedent requires an applicant to market their TDRs prior to filing a hardship. And I'm going to ask Mark to go into that.
Thank you. The question of whether precedent requires marketing is something that the urban factors on behalf of the center raised, and it was also raised by the center's attorneys. To give you a sense of what the argument is, that they would argue that commission precedent requires there be active marketing, and went so far as to say that this requirement, would require the church to go to every single potential receiving site and ask, do you want to buy my air rights? And so it's a very, very strict view of what that would be. And I just want to make sure the record is clear that first, the church did not market its air rights, either before filing in 2022 or in 2025. And that the commission has made clear that potential revenue from the sale of TDRs is relevant to hardship analysis. This makes sense. There are special provisions in the zoning resolution that grant individual landmarks greater flexibility to sell those rights. The purpose of this provision is to compensate owners of individual landmarks and to provide funds that could be used to maintain them. This potential revenue source could make the difference in a hardship. The center is correct that in two previous hardship determinations, the Stall for-profit hardship and the St. Bartholomew's not-for-profit hardship, the commission opined that TDRs should be considered in some manner. However, neither of these decisions stand for the proposition that the commission, quote, requires, unquote, TDRs to be marketed before a hardship is filed, and that the failure to do so by itself is grounds to deny the application. Install the argument that there were no viable receiving sites was obviously false. It was clear the applicant could have sold its TDRs to itself because it owned the property just across the street. In addition, there was another development site across another street at Rockefeller University. Also, in that case, the commission noted Stall didn't put any expert testimony on the record. But most importantly, the decision to deny the hardship in Stall had nothing to do with TDRs. The commission noted all of this and then went on to deny the hardship based on the fact that with substantial investment in fixing properties and fixing apartments up and bringing them back to market and such, the property could yield a reasonable return. So that wasn't a factor in the actual decision. In the decision in TDRs, the decision in St. Bartholomew's discussed TDRs as one of the many factors that made up the commission's reasonably prudent management discussion as part of the third factor, actually. The record indicated there appeared to be one potential interested party. The commission concluded that at best, the testimony indicated there was no immediate potential to sell TDRs. However, St. Bartholomew's situation was very different from West Park. It had other substantial assets, wasn't under a financial strain from a diminishing congregation, and therefore had time to try and market its development rights. So in that case, it was one factor among many. Therefore, just is my view that these prior determinations don't stand for the proposition that TDRs must be marketed prior to filing a hardship application, but rather that we will consider them in a hardship application.
Well,
Yes.
So are you saying that in this specific case for West Park, the TDRs would only be considered as value if there was a proposed or viable site to transfer them to, or an interested party to actually purchase them from the church?
Well, I'm going to be a lawyer here. My answer to that question is that it would depend. You can, first of all, you could rely on the testimony you've heard. So there's been extensive, as was indicated earlier, extensive testimony, not only by the applicant, our own appraiser did its own analysis, but in addition, the center put in quite a bit of information as well. And so what I'm saying is that that it is not the case that the failure to market the TDRs is therefore equivalent to basically a denial of this application, but that you can rely on the expert testimony as you understand it and choose to rely on it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mahan.
I think the question here, is the value of TDRs is not known, quantity, a known commodity equivalent at every site. So the question, is what is their value? And in this particular instance, at this particular site. And, it certainly would have made our job easier and made this more straightforward had the applicant marketed their TDRs. They didn't. That being said, they have argued, and I personally find it persuasive, that it's reasonable to understand, or it's reasonable for them to know that there is no to little market for their TDRs given the specifics of the site, and therefore having not gone and knocked on every single door and said, would you like to buy my TDRs, is not a reasonable thing to have required them to do.
Commissioner Goldblum.
So in the course of our conversations, there's been discussion about if one were to assign a value to these TDRs in a market scenario, in a generalized market scenario, you'd have to discount them because of the difficulties that we're talking about of finding a site, etc. Is there a formula for that? How, and and what would a formula for that look like? Ooh.
Let's pause for a moment for technology issues.
Okay,
Do we just want to make sure it's okay?
good,
Let's pause for just 1 second.
sure.
And the Zoom is recording on the main PC. Okay, it looks like we're
So,
great now.
What would a discounted, because they obviously have value in the abstract, and if, a building next door were to blow up in 5 years and all of a sudden their site would develop, that might be a site. So what would the responsible actuarial way of valuing such an asset be? And should that, could that be applied to the overall analysis?
Angie, you want to answer that? No.
You know what?
Yep.
So I think I said that there really isn't an options market for TDRs. However, in the analysis, I believe the center and Weitzman they each did assign a value to the TDRs, which I would argue is not realistic. However, they did it just for the purposes of doing it. And I think that the number that they came up with, I think I saw 1.5 up to 5 million, but I would argue that that's artificial because there is
Right.
no option.
Right.
Right.
Understanding that there's no options. And I think the idea of when we were talking about it in the past about discounting the value of the TDRs because of the difficulty of applying them, what that math was trying to do was it was trying to acknowledge the difficulty of finding a receiving site, yet considering the possibility over a period of time that such sites might be found. Granted, they wouldn't be the whole wad at market value today, but they might be a little bit. You know, you might have a guy down the block who wants to put a rear yard addition or something like that, you know, so that even if it's not black and white, is there a gray? And how would you factor that out? In other words, would you say that if, let's say, the value is $1.5 million, would you say that, well, because of uncertainty and difficulty, we would cut that in half, we would give it 10%? How would we, you know, there has to be some value to it. It's not zero, you know, so it's got to be,
That's something that we can debate, but the issue is, yes, there is a value. It's a long-term value, right? Over the course of 20 years, something can certainly change and somebody could do an assemblage. So there could be value. The interesting thing is that as I interpret this is like immediate or in the near term, what type of value does it have? And because there isn't an options market for TDRs, I would argue that they have no value when I look in like the next year. Does that make sense? Yes, certainly they have long-term value. And the long-term value is best captured in an options market.
And Commissioner, if I could just follow up just a little bit on that, which is simply that one of the issues that was debated amongst the experts was this question of all these constraints on the properties and what it would mean to develop them. And I think that there was a lot of testimony about if there's co-ops and residential building, or there's rent stabilizers, rent, all this stuff takes a long years to deal with. Not that it can't ultimately be done, but the question is years. And I think going back to the question of the test year that you raised and this question of how far in the future must one look, I think that the reasonable return and the sort of hardship analysis is really trying to say, okay, what can we replicate into the future? And it can't be too far in the future because, of course, there are economic conditions right now. And I think that's why, Weitzman in particular, as in his written report, felt very strongly they don't, we asked him to look at that. He came up with a figure of 5 million, but he said that was he placed no real value in that because the question would be, how would you include it? Would it include as, do you reduce the cost of the repairs? But of course, if the money's not coming in for how many years, you can't really do that. Are you going to sell the TDRs for, pennies on the dollar to get something, that's not realistic either. So I think it's difficult to factor, and I think this is why it raises the question, if there's not known development sites or a clear possibility, the commission should be careful how it includes that in a reasonable return analysis.
I hear you. My question though, go ahead, sorry.
Commissioner Quembe has a question or a comment.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, just to understand, so we're saying that there truly is no metric to measure the TDRs per se. A criteria in which we could utilize to actually give them a value.
Well, I mean, if you sell the TDRs, there's let's say there's 80 to 85,000 TDRs available. And let's say that we give them a value of maybe $250, a square foot, then there is a value once it's sold.
Once it's sold, but there's no way to really gauge the viability of actually having them to be able to be sold.
It's really demand driven.
It's demand driven.
Yeah. And the issue is that I think we have to look at it in the near term. So if in the near term, we don't have a viable receiving site, somebody who's sought it out, then I could argue that the value is nothing right now. Certainly in the long term, 10, 20 years, it will have value once it's sold. If it's sold.
Commissioner Chu?
It's interesting because it seems that maybe the only value that square footage has is potential development site on its own site now, in terms of the way the numbers are being calculated or proposals are looked at in terms of a return.
Any other comments or questions on TDRs or factor two? Some of these issues come up in factor three as well, if we want to move on. Commissioner Goldblum?
Just to clarify the term conversation. Are we looking at a particular term to kind of distill value or not? I mean, we are looking at like a lease term, right? The assumption is that a lease term will set a rent, and that some work we have been considering, consider the cost of doing things over time, like renovations over time. So and those are factored into this issue. So is there a term, or is it 1 year? Is it 10 years? What is the term over which we're looking at the whole project?
Well, the landmarks law only, in terms of timing, only refers to the test year as exemplary, right? So it doesn't say test year, going forward for 5 years. It doesn't say anything like that. And I think the commission has the discretion to consider what that might be in light of sort of the reality of the applicant and the conditions that it's facing and other conditions that exist, in the surrounding area. So I think, if there was, this is just talking out loud, if there was talk on the street that there was a development site, maybe that could be something to consider. But if that was going to be unclear for another 10 years, I think that doesn't help us in this case for this applicant under these conditions. So I think it would really depend on the very specific facts.
Vice Chair Master? Oh, Commissioner Wilder.
Just a quick question. So were the marketing of the TDRs required during the first application?
It is my view that the precedent of the Landmarks Commission's prior determinations, there's no requirement that it be marketed.
We're not. We're saying they were.
And they were not. There's no dispute about it. Right.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we move to factor three, Commissioner Chu, do you have a quick?
Sorry, if it's related to factor three, I'll stop. But there is my question in terms of the reasonable return and the scenarios that were looked at for the use of those scenarios were residential in my recollection.
So I think number one was as is,
Yes.
probably rented
Yes.
to a nonprofit. Number two is an infill. We put like 3,000 square feet probably a nonprofit. Three was multifamily.
Was a
And then four
multifamily,
was mixed use.
which had increased square footage, et cetera, et cetera. But when we get to point factor three, which is the use of the building to be as it is today in terms of the building.
I think
Of-
there's probably more renovation, significantly more renovation, right? Because you're creating basically apartments out of the.
My question is whether or not those scenarios are even valid because of their use.
I think this goes back to Commissioner Goldblum's question. I think that for purpose and the discussion, in fact, I think people recognize early on that on all the party side, that the discussion is really at this point about the existing use of the building
Right.
as it exists now without punching windows
Right.
in it and making it. So for purposes of factor three, the question would be the building as it exists, right? And whether it is adequate, suitable, and appropriate for carrying out the purposes which is being used for and for which it was used for when acquired. So,
Okay, so are the purposes of the points of arguing for hardship, the building technically needs to be as it is today in terms of its physical form, and the use needs to be consistent with the purposes as it's being used?
well, again, there's the reasonable return analysis, which went through some scenarios, and I think now we're moving to the third factor, and the third factor is really looking at the building as it exists, because the question is the building now adequate, suitable, and appropriate for carrying, for continuing the purposes for which it has been used?
Okay. All
And with that, why don't we have Mark explain the third factor to us?
Okay, yes, that would have been useful a while ago. Okay. So the third factor of the statutory hardship test requires the church to demonstrate that the building, quote, has ceased to be adequate, suitable, or appropriate for use for carrying out both, at one, the purposes of such owner to which it is devoted, so the current purposes, and two, those purposes to which it had been devoted when acquired, in this case, built, unless the owner is no longer engaged in those purposes. Notably, and unlike the second factor in reasonable return analysis, there's no formula for determining whether a building is adequate, suitable, or appropriate for carrying out the owner's purposes, nor does the law elucidate the meaning of these words with definitions. Guidance, however, and this refers back to my presentation earlier in June, guidance is found in prior nonprofit hardship cases where the commission has equated the third factor with the judicial hardship test. The judicial test considers whether compliance with the law, quote, physically or financially prevents or seriously interferes with carrying out the charitable purpose, close quote. And the answer to those to these questions depends on, quote, the purposes and resources of the petitioner. This test recognizes that adequate, suitable, and appropriate have a physical and financial component, and that these terms connote a physical ability to carry out the charitable purposes, as well as the financial wherewithal to do so. It is worth stressing that the economic inquiry of the third factor is very different from the reasonable return inquiry of the second factor. The reasonable return inquiry focuses on an economic formula and takes a market approach to determining if the property can yield a reasonable return. In contrast, the economic inquiry of the third factor looks at the owner's capacity to address the economics of making the property adequate, suitable, or appropriate. This involves looking at the nonprofit's economic resources, but also at opportunities to find economic support elsewhere. For example, in the St. Bartholomew's hardship determination, the commission considered whether St. Bart's could find the money necessary to add an addition to its community house in light of the church's endowment investment account, fundraising from the congregation, doing a capital campaign, partnering with a nonprofit, and selling TDRs, and whether in light of these resources and opportunities, St. Bart's could reasonably address the financial issues through what it called prudent financial planning. So that's what the third factor is looking at. Well, can you hear me now, Abby? Okay. So with that.
Pardon me, my mic was off. I'll start over. Commissioners, the three main points we need to discuss are the purposes for which the building is and has been used, the physical suitability of the church, and the financial suitability. And as Mark noted, the issue for us to explore is whether the maintenance of the property physically or financially prevents or seriously interferes with carrying out the purposes. So, the purposes for which the building is and has been used. So the test requires us to determine what the property is currently used for and what it was used for when it was built. So in my mind, it's pretty clear that the purposes to which the building is being used and was being used for at the time of its construction are religious worship, community services, and arts programming. So if anybody feels differently, we can discuss or just move to the next point. So the physical suitability of the church. So the next point is whether the church building is still physically adequate, suitable, or appropriate for carrying out these purposes. So does maintenance of the building physically prevent or seriously interfere with carrying out these purposes? The church doesn't directly address the issue of physical use, but instead argues that the building is unsuitable because it is too big and expensive to maintain. It has, however, continued to use the building for some programming and occasional religious use. And of course, the building was heavily programmed while the center occupied the building and up until December 2024, when the last tenants left. To me, that suggests that the building, putting aside the financial issues that we'll get to, has physical suitability for religious worship, community services, and arts programming. So would any commissioners want to comment on that point of the physical suitability? Okay, then let's move to the financial suitability of the church. So this is the more challenging issue for us to consider, and it's whether the financial suitability, and it's related to the financial suitability of the church. So the analysis is whether maintaining the building financially prevents or interferes with carrying out the purposes. So the way to address this point is to apply the approach used in St. Bart's and consider the resources available to the church and what opportunities it explored to try to raise money and to address the financial issues facing the congregation. So I think we should first consider these resources and efforts leading up to the church's decision in 2020 and 2022 to end the relationship with the center, and then ask whether the center's improved performance since 2022 and culminating in its July 10th, whether that changes the analysis. So I'll break this down a bit more. So in terms of where the church is financially today, they claim in a July 10th letter that as of July 2025, the church has only $600 in the bank and was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. In terms of whether the church took advantage of financial resources and opportunities over the years, the record suggests that the church tried very hard to address the financial issues it faced. In summary, they sold all of its major assets to fund the repairs of the building and the church's operations. They sought money from elected officials and the community. They applied for and received some grants. They unsuccessfully marketed the building to try and find a tenant who would rent the building or partner with the church. They rented out the church to a variety of nonprofits and community groups. And then finally, it created the center for the purposes of managing the building and applying for grants and trying to get donations to fix up the exterior and assign all of its income to the center in an effort to help it get started, asking that it only pay a tiny rent in return. So in the end, after 2 years of operations with the center struggling and the church looking at its dwindling bank account, the church decided the partnership with the center wasn't working and decided to sell the building. In 2022, the year the hardship was filed, the center ran a $106,000 deficit, and the church had only $28,000 in its bank account. Thus, one can argue that the church did practically everything the commission mentioned in the St. Bart's decision. The church didn't try and separately sell its TDRs, but we've discussed that issue previously. So finally, how do we address the center's improved performance and its July 10th term sheet? Offer the center made to lease the building for 10 years for $720,000 a year and prepay 6 months of rent. It submitted documents purporting to show that it had more than $1.3 million in cash and irrevocable pledges to establish a $5 million building fund and a $680,000 reserve fund. So all total, it claims to have approximately $7.6 million in total current resources. However, $2 million of that is a loan at a 5% interest that will have to be paid back and includes $590,000 of unidentified and unexplained receivables. And all of the pledges are contingent on the church giving the center a 10-year lease. So when the church ended its relationship with the center in 2020 and 2022, the center was in a negative position. According to Form 990s, the center showed negative net assets from 2020, minus 188,000 roughly, 2021 minus 121,000, and in 2022 minus $227,000 roughly. So the center's past performance improved in the last few years, and that may be a relevant fact for us to consider. However, is the center and its offer a financial resource that we believe is so substantial that it merits denying the hardship? The center has found success only recently, is requiring a long-term lease, which is 10 years, It is proposing to pay a rent that is 24 times higher than the $30,000 it was previously paying. So as a practical matter, as we understand the center's finances, it doesn't have much more than the cash on hand. The rest are pledges. And the parties have a history. The church is entitled to look at the credit worthiness and track record of the center and conclude it's not an organization with which it would be reasonable or prudent to enter into a 10-year relationship with. And we should think about this as well as making our own determination. So commissioners, any thoughts on particularly this financial issue in the third factor? Vice Chair Master.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that you had also talked about, but the question was the center did offer to lease the property as is. On July 10th, 2026, they offered the church to lease the church for 10 years at $60,000 a month, which was double the prior rent offer, which was $30,000 a month on June 11th, 2025. So that number, close to $40 a square foot, is similar to the threshold for the Friedman $9.1 million restoration, which I suspect might have gave them an incentive to make that 10-year lease offer. So I believe that the center's 2025 and 2026 offers are not representative of the free market real estate marketplace because the center is a unique tenant. And it was created by the church in 2016 to manage the building and raise funds for renovation. So in real estate, market rents are really established through arm's length transactions in which unaffiliated parties negotiate freely and without conflicting interests. And that is not the case here. So I do not believe it is realistic that a free market tenant would pay nearly $40 a square foot for the church in its as-is condition without interior renovations needed to bring the building up to code. In addition, I also do not believe a typical landlord would consider the center a creditworthy tenant for a 10-year lease because they lack the track record of strong, stable revenue, variable fundraising, and they lack substantial financial assets.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Right. But as we've talked about so far today, this particular factor is less about the market and what would the abstract scenario be, but more about the specifics of this very weird particular building. So I think that it's relevant to ask the question, given these particular facts that we have, that you have an offer on the table that appears, to the best of our ability to understand it, to be a bona fide offer. Should we be considering that in this factor, not in the second one where it was all about the market, but here where it's about the specifics of this particular relationship?
I agree with your point, Commissioner Goldblum, about the third factor being about the specifics of this unusual relationship. I think one of the questions before us is, do we have an offer? Does the church have an offer on the table? As I understand it, this is actually not an offer on the table. This is an offer to make an offer. And not only that, it's the second time there's an offer to make an offer. And it just goes, to the kind of constantly changing sort of offers and, effort to sort of undermine, I suppose, the application for good reason, of course, but it's unclear, I think, in the record that this offer is real or viable.
Well,
perhaps it is.
What is the term? What does the word term sheet mean? What does the word term sheet mean? Because the July 10th thing is called a term sheet. So what is a term sheet? To be very straight, is that a offer to make an offer, or is that something more? What is it?
I think that before we go down this route, I think that it's probably easier to think about this as simply let's treat it as an offer that, and the question is whether this tenant is capable of fulfilling its obligation under the offer. Because I think there is, a real situation where they're in a contract and the ability of other parties to come in and waive true offers in front of them is complicated. But I think that doesn't mean you have to accept the offer as valid or whatever. You can look at it and ask about the circumstances of it, ask about whether this tenant, the person making it is good for the obligations that they're referring to.
Thank you for the clarification.
I think, just as a comment, I think maybe Angie, that's what you were referring to when you were talking about the validity of an offer as such, and whether or not that needs to be considered as a true numbers that we can look at.
Well, what do we know about this offer? Has there been any proof or documentation that's been provided that's reliable?
What's been provided was provided in their final submission, which is the offer itself and copies of pledges that were made to support various parts of that. Okay. The question would be, some of those pledges are to be paid out over a certain number of years. One of the pledges is in fact a pledge to make a loan, which has to be paid back. So there are, it's not clear exactly, all the particulars, but that they're there.
So are there ways to ask? I know that the hearing's been, the meeting's been closed and we don't want to reopen that, but are there ways for the center to communicate to the commission to give greater specificity? If this is in fact a pivotal question and something we should consider, is there a way for them to convey additional information that would address some of the questions that you raise?
Well, that would be a question for the commissioners to decide about whether to reopen the record or whatever. But I do think maybe as a starting point, one could ask the question, assuming that, let's just assume for a minute that the offer is real, right? The next question would be, okay, based on their past performances, based on what they have in the bank, based on this, do we think that the center is the kind of tenant that we as a government agency would say, okay, we're going to deny the hardship because they're solid enough that we believe they can follow through on these obligations. And I think that's another way of thinking about it. The question is if in the market, right, no landlord would accept this offer by a tenant given the history of this tenant, then I think that's something we have to think about. Because again, we don't want to be in a situation where a hardship is potentially sort of undercut by someone simply saying, I have the money and I promised, I'm willing to give it to you. And the question is whether you can consider that to be sort of viable, okay? And the other thing I think is because this is such a complicated fact pattern, right? I think if one, again, falls back on the St. Bart's kind of framing of this, what have you done to try to address these things? I think one could say, okay, we did all these other things. We started the center. We decided the center wasn't working, and we ended that relationship. And so now the fact that they tried what we asked them to try, right? Or and the question is now that someone else has now, raised their hand and said, we can do this. The question is how does one consider that? That's kind of the question before you. Okay, can you please stop talking?
That long fact pattern that I went through, I think is most relevant. And Vice Chair Master.
Yeah, I think I had kind of addressed that question. I mean, I called it typically market tenant, but if you evaluate the 10-year lease paying $60,000 a month, understanding that in the 5-year lease that they had, they paid $3,000 a month, is this what a landlord would consider a good offer? And I would argue no, because I don't think that a landlord would think that the center, given the filings of the 990s, a track record that they have the history of financial strength to support it. They don't necessarily have the financial assets because a bulk of what they have in their assets are pledges /loans/restricted grants. And they don't have a history of showing that they can raise, 2.5 million a year. And so I would say it's not what I would consider a strong offer.
Any other commissioners want to comment on this point? Okay, then let's move to the fourth factor, which is another one that is really reliant on matters of legal interpretation. So I'm going to ask Mark to review it in its entirety.
So the fourth factor focuses on Alchemy as the purchaser and requires Alchemy to demonstrate two things: that it seeks, quote, seeks and intends in good faith to close quote, to demolish the church building, quote, immediately, close quote, and it will build a new building, quote, with reasonable promptness, close quote. The purpose of this requirement appears to be to avoid the situation where a hardship has been determined, but the designated property remains standing for a long period of time, during which the underlying economic and other conditions that form the basis of the hardship could materially change. The applicant and Alchemy argues it has satisfied the fourth factor because it has submitted a demolition contract, a contract with an architect and a preliminary designs for a new building. The church has said if the commission finds a hardship, that it will apply for court approval of the contract with Alchemy during the 180-day period when the commission is looking for an alternative purchaser. In their view, they have demonstrated a good faith intention to demolish immediately and rebuild with reasonable promptness. The center says this is insufficient, focusing primarily on the word immediately because the church hasn't sought court approval of the contract to sell the building, which it's required to obtain pursuant to the Religious Corporations Law, and that this will take time, and the center has also threatened to sue to stop this process. The center also argues Alchemy hasn't filed anything at the Department of Buildings, either for the demolition or the new building, and all this will take months, if not years, to obtain. The church and Alchemy counter that it is premature to seek a court approval for a contract that may never happen if the hardship isn't granted or may be renegotiated, and therefore the terms and price could change, thus necessitating another court proceeding. They make similar arguments with respect to the DOB filings. This issue has not been interpreted by the commission or a court. The church's interpretation has a real-world practicality about it. Would it be unreasonable for the commission to require a nonprofit to obtain court approval for a contract that may never happen if the hardship is denied? The church has stated it will seek to get this court approval while the commission is searching for an alternative buyer. It's important to remember the immediacy requirement is modified by the phrase good faith intention, and it's Alchemy intention that is the issue. In addition, it's important to remember this requirement is occurring in the context, first, where no demolition or new building permit can be issued by the Department of Buildings until the commission has issued a notice to proceed. And a notice to proceed won't be issued until approximately 290 days after the issuance of a preliminary determination of hardship. Thus, the hardship test has a built-in time frame within which the church and Alchemy can seek both court approval and file for demolition and begin putting together the architectural and other drawings and materials necessary to pull the new building permit. The argument in favor of concluding the applicant and purchaser have not satisfied the fourth factor and should have gotten court approval prior to filing the hardship is to avoid the commission having wasted its time going through the hardship process if the contract is not approved. This has merit too. However, we've never told the applicant it had to or should get court approval prior to filing of the hardship, or else we would deny the application. And so those are the sort of policy rationales in front of you. And given that we have never required and told the applicant this was a condition of the application prior to this, to me, the applicant has, and the purchaser and their commitment to seeking the approvals during the 290 days prior to the issuance of a notice to proceed, if we find a hardship, I believe this satisfies the immediacy requirement of the law. And now in the future, if the commission wants to impose this requirement going forward, obviously it can. I think in this case, I would argue it's not necessary.
Are there any questions or comments on the fourth factor.
Just in reference to what, Mark, you just stated, is there any, that is based on the assumption that the court's decision would not be affected by this commission's decision?
Well, I think that what the church has argued is, so the purpose of the religious corporation law requires religious nonprofits to get either the Attorney General approval or court approval for a sale or a long-term lease of real property. And the purpose of that is to ensure, is the assumption that, nonprofits aren't savvy and whatever, and that therefore they want to ensure that the deal is a legitimate deal and there's no self-dealing and stuff like this, fair price, that sort of thing. So it's a very straightforward requirement, to look at those things. And so the church has said that it would file, but it looks at the contract. And so the church's point is that if they went ahead and spent the money and time to get the court approval prior to filing, and then the commission denied the application, for example, okay, there would undoubtedly be a renegotiated contract with somebody, or there'd be another contract and then there would be the need to go back again and get that. And that, given that it can accomplish these things during this, shortly after we issue a preliminary determination, that they've satisfied this requirement. And the center takes the view it should be sort of a per se requirement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've experienced this too with a nonprofit sale. And typically it's done when the contract is pretty certain. So I would say it's probably more appropriate for it to occur after hardship has been approved.
Okay. So we've reached the end of the four factors. And if anybody wants to make, any additional comments, share any additional thoughts, we can certainly do that. We could also request that, our general counsel prepare a draft determination. If we have a feeling of that direction, but I want to give people an opportunity to share any additional thoughts, if you have any. Commissioner Chu?
We had discussed briefly when we were discussing point 2 that we would come back to interior work, and we didn't do that. So I just thought it might be appropriate to cover that briefly.
Yeah, so I think the reasonable returns analysis, the Stanley Friedman 9.1 million exterior renovation only, assumed that it could be rented without doing any interior work, right, to a tenant. And so as a realtor, and I think you guys probably have experienced this as well as architects, landlords typically provide space that meets building code requirements, including life safety systems, fire code, and ADA accessibility. I would have trouble securing a credit-worthy nonprofit tenant for a long-term lease paying market rents in the as-is condition of the church building. So I would also argue that in 2012, when Cushman Wakefield tried to lease the church building to a credit-worthy tenant, that their efforts were unsuccessful, probably because of the interior conditions and because the landlord was not capable of, bringing the building up to code. So, the other thing to think about, in my opinion, which is important, is that if you lease the building to a non-religious tenant, not another church, it would also likely require a change of use, right? And an updated certificate of occupancy. And that would also require the property to conform with current building codes.
Any analysis on an investment on cost of renovation to increase the square footage rental probably in these scenarios is hard to pan out, that an investment in improving those conditions on the interior and being calculated for a higher rent.
I think the interior and exterior renovation was something like 55 million. I believe that was.
The applicants for scenarios all presumed, because they also felt that you had that change of use or occupancy or ownership would trigger a mandatory requirement, and they also argued that that to get the highest rent
Rent.
in the base scenario, you should also do interior.
Okay.
Anybody?
Will there be an opportunity on another day to share, I don't know, some concluding thoughts or wrap-up thoughts, if not today? Or will we?
Well, I think that, a reasonable next step would be to have a draft determination for the commissioners to review. And, then there could be thoughts based on that determination to share at a future time. But, I'd say if you have thoughts now, you're welcome to share them.
Thank you.
I would suggest that that's the best way to move forward, is to have a draft determination drawn that's shared with the commissioners. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Okay, then let's do that. And we're just going to go to the next item, which is going back to the public hearing, to item number 2 in the public hearing. And we'll go to Corey for that.
All right. Thank you. I'll go ahead and start reading these in. It's actually the next 2 items, and they will be presented at the same time by the same applicant. It's public hearing items number 2 and 3, starting with public hearing item number 2. That's LPC 25-07989, an application for a binding report in the Borough of Queens, Block 5917, Lot 1, 318 Murray Avenue in the Fort Totten Historic District, a neo-Georgian-style athletic facility designed by the Office of the Quartermaster General and built in 1926 to 27. The application is to replace roofing, windows, and doors and construct a barrier-free access ramp. And public hearing item number 3 is LPC 25-07912, also an application for a binding report in the Borough of Queens, Block 5917, Lot 1, 332 Theater Road in the Fort Totten Historic District. This is a colonial revival style theater building designed by the Office of the Quartermaster General and built in 1938 to 39. And this application is to replace roofing and windows and construct a barrier-free access ramp.
You can begin. Thank you.
Apologies, Commissioners. Richard Lowry, staff. I'll do a basic presentation. Sorry, our half our team got caught out by the short movement back up onto schedule. So I'll quickly go through the scope of work, and the engineer Scott Borshot and the FDNY architect Irma Fontaine will be here to answer any questions. The proposed scope of work are 2 buildings at the Fort Totten Historic District that intersect with the FDNY campus. There's building 332 and 318, both built for the Army Corps of Engineers, and both in a fairly dilapidated state. The proposal is a restoration of the building and an adaptive reuse as part of the FDNY's campus to be used predominantly as classrooms for the FDNY training scheme. In addition to the restoration of the brick facades and the limestone and the interiors, the scopes of work will be to replace windows, replace the roof, and to construct 2 barrier-free access ramps, 1 at each building, in addition to supplemental railings at steps, which are all considered staff level. So the items for determination today would be the replacement of the roof using a substitute material instead of natural slate. To use a substitute material for the multi-light windows and a change of operation for some of the larger windows to fixed. And the barrier-free access ramps, which are a little larger than we would typically see for a staff level approval, with some right angle changes and intermediate landings, which are there to configure for the, I guess, the on-site conditions. Give you a quick sense of like the current dilapidation. So one of the things that they found for the ramps is that the grade of the surrounding area is sloping towards the building, causing water to run towards the building and then to infiltrate at the lower levels. So they would be regrading away from the building. And then also they want to raise the steps on the upper landing to align with the interior floor, the ground floor, which is raised a couple of feet above the surrounding grade anyway. Also, you can see in order not to integrate these into the existing facades of the building, the ramps at this particular building will be offset. And consequently, they have a recessed central bay with two projecting wings. So consequently, we have the right angle configuration with an intermediate landing here. And at the other building at 332, it's a little bit more straightforward. It's a sort of side entrance at the main portico entrance. Again, with a right angle and offset and a slightly taller than we would typically see at staff level. The roof of both of the buildings is in a fairly dilapidated state, which will require the reconstruction of the framing, the roof assembly. There are big chunks of the slate which have previously been removed. In some cases, it's sort of asphalt slate, sorry, asphalt paper. In some cases, it's just sort of bitumen paper covering the holes. The issue, not just for the cost, but I guess the weight of the new building and the condition of this approximately 100-year-old slate, and that the removal of the roofing assembly will make it very difficult to sort of retain the existing slate. Previously, when they've come to the commission for buildings within Fort Totten, both with FDNY and with the Parks Department, the commission has approved several times substitute materials. Those have largely been sort of asphalt shingles. This time they're going through a more dimensional substitute material, which has sort of the texture, the shadow lines, and the color, which is more akin to the slate that's currently there. So they're asking if they could go with a substitute material for the shingles. And then for the windows, the majority of them at the theater tend to be just the sort of the multi-light double hungs, and they're proposing sort of multi-light single hungs. That change in operation could be affected at staff level. However, because of the very salty marine environment of Fort Totten, they're asking to go with a clad material, so clad sort of substitute material. It was discussed of looking at sort of fiberglass, and in recent discussions that we've had, potentially going for like a fiberglass clad or a metal clad wood window, which they're exploring. Some of the ones at the, then they have the very, very large openings with the arched head. The weight and the size of these windows, they're asking to go for just a straightforward fixed windows, upper and lower, but with a recessed lower sash so that it simulates the double hung operation. But they're concerned with the weight and trying to open these windows. So keeping those two types as fixed. The details have got, there probably need some additional refinement for like the muntins and the brick molds. But we think that with a track record that we have with the FDNY at Fort Totten, that sort of we can work with those at staff level. So I'll leave it with you and my colleagues here at Irma Fontaine from FDNY and Scott Borshot. We're here to answer any questions.
Commissioner Chen.
Let me, okay. Glad to hear that you're trying to do something other than shingles to simulate the slate. Do you know that material has that been used in other sites in the nearby buildings?
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm Orchard. I'm Meg, project engineer.
Okay. As I was saying, given the, as been mentioned, is quite salty there as well as quite windy because you're exposed and not far from the Douglaston Manor. I'm glad to hear that you're using something other than the prior shingles to simulate the slate. Has this material been used in the nearby surroundings or is it the first time you're using on Fort Totten?
Both Irma and Patrick, the architect, are more qualified than I to answer that question.
Good afternoon. So the simulated slate, I do not believe have been used on Fort Totten before, but they are used in the area. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but it's relatively easy to procure. So for the fire department, we look for material. All right. Okay, sorry. So to finish, what I was starting to say is that in terms of using material on our projects, we try very, very hard not to use like first time. We don't want to be the precedent. We don't want to be the guinea pig. And certainly we also don't want to pay a premium for imported stuff that have been used elsewhere. So I can't honestly say if we've used it in Fort Totten. I don't believe we have. No, he's saying we haven't.
Yeah.
We've had to use asphalt shingles as a desperate measure for the smaller buildings, but for this larger building, we want to simulate the slate. And I feel that this product is the right product for us in terms of the hands that we have right now, which is always budget and longevity.
Thank you. Very good to hear.
Yeah, and I can just note the commission has reviewed and approved this very product and similar ones on multiple occasions, especially when the historic roofing has already been replaced, but also in some instances where it's either partially missing or is clearly deteriorated beyond repair. And I think as for the specifications for concerns of wind and durability in this environment, the architects and engineers would continue to ensure that that is viable.
Commissioner Ginsburg?
For the windows, the divisions, there are no details you have there. Are these going to be true divided lights, true simulated divided lights, or just glue-on material at the exterior?
Thank you for that question. We are definitely, my goal as the chief architect of the fire department is to make sure that our construction is as aesthetically pleasing as possible. no glue-ons. I'm not approving any glue-ons. So I understand that, and I've known from the get-go from this project, I'm very excited about this project because these buildings have stood vacant for so long. My goal from the start of this project is to renovate, or I was going to say rebuild, but we're not rebuilding, to renovate these buildings as true as possible. It's a setting in a park setting, public setting. I don't want a hokey look. I don't want to pretend renovation. I want a real renovation. So no glue-ons. We're still working out the details about the windows. It's sort of difficult to find the right product. But certainly, Scott, Patrick, and I were working on it, and Lisa as well, she's the project manager. And we will provide details in the near future of whatever product we do find. But I can assure you, it's not going to be a hokey product. I will not permit that.
Thank you, and I appreciate that.
Commissioner Chu?
Being that it is the fire department, the fire rating of these materials, you can get those tiles as Class A too. I'm just wondering if that is a requirement that you guys would like to satisfy.
I'm not quite sure.
It is, you can get Class A. I'm aware of that. Okay. And the windows as well, if that's a consideration, because fiberglass is also not fireproof.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. Duly noted.
Okay, any other questions on this? Not seeing any. Let's go ahead and move to testimony. Is there anybody in the room that would like to testify on this item? Okay, not seeing anybody. Let's move to Stephen and to Zoom testimony.
Participants on Zoom wishing to speak, please raise your hand. When your name is called, you'll be promoted to panelist, after which we ask you to unmute yourself, state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. The first speaker is Historic Districts Council.
Hello, this is Emma Bartley speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC commends the investment being made in these important civic buildings and supports efforts to ensure their long-term use and accessibility. While we recognize that synthetic slate can offer cost savings and may be easier to source than natural slate, HDC typically advocates for the use of natural, historically appropriate materials wherever feasible. Rather than wholesale replacement, we ask if the applicant could selectively repair and replace only damaged and missing slate, preserving as much of the existing historic roofing material as possible. Should the commission determine that a new synthetic slate roof replacement is appropriate, we urge careful attention to installation details, particularly the continued use of copper flashing, which will be essential to both the appearance and long-term performance of the roof. In addition, HDC recommends reconsidering the proposed fiberglass windows in favor of aluminum-clad wood windows. Thank you.
The next speaker is Andrew Cronson.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Cronson. I am an architectural historian and recent Columbia graduate. I was delighted to see this plan and this proposal to have these two buildings from Fort Totten, which had been in disrepair, in the process of being restored and put to a new purpose, defending and protecting New Yorkers' welfare. Like the Historic Districts Council, I am also a bit concerned with seeing this great investment be potentially stymied by the use of synthetic products, which may not be as viable or as strong in the long term for the type of construction being done. When you look at slate roofing, mainly the cost is to have it put in, and then over time, its longevity is built to last for decades and decades afterwards. I would also encourage a sort of interpretation, if possible, as part of this for people who are coming in to know what these buildings were used for. When you have candidates coming in, to see that they were at the theater, the YMCA, and so forth, adds a dimension of appreciation and understanding of where they are cited. Was not originally a classroom, it was a different purpose for Fort Totten. Though these architects who contributed and built these buildings were not named or really well known. They were generally staff. They have a value and a building cachet that they were able to put in at Fort Taunton and elsewhere that is really beautiful and lasting and forms a great part of the New York City streetscape. Thank you very much.
Any other participants on Zoom wishing to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll note for the record that Queens Community Board 7 recommends approval.
Would you like to respond to any of the testimony that we heard?
Thank you. So regarding the use of the simulated slate, as opposed on the entire roof, as opposed to patching the existing roof, we were only given a finite amount of money to do these repairs. And we would like to have a full roof warranty on these buildings. And to patch them would make a condition where it's higher, the likelihood of there being leaks are higher than if we would just have the full roof replaced with the proper insulation and the warranties in place. So that's why the fire department is advocating and designing for a full roof replacement and a full roof replacement of a simulated slate as opposed to full slate, because we don't have the budget for full slate. The fire department has petitioned to have funding for the repair of these buildings and other buildings on Fort Totten. Unfortunately, the DOB had declared an emergency demo for a few of them, and we lost 3 of them to that emergency demo because they become, in disrepair, a hazard. And being in a public park, in a public setting, we can't have that condition. So what the fire department has done over a number of years is to petition OMB. We finally got the funding, and we're working within the confines of what OMB allows. So that's why we went toward the fake slate or the simulated slate as opposed to the actual slate. And with regard to the windows, the aluminum clad windows, we're most likely going to move forward with that. But we're still, like I mentioned earlier, researching what can be done and how it should be done. Thank you.
Commissioners, are there any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Let's go ahead and close the hearing. Commissioner Ginsburg, could you make a motion?
So moved.
And Vice Chair Master, will you second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed. And I'll just start with a few remarks that this is an application for investment in these 2 FDNY buildings at Fort Totten to replace the roofing, windows and doors, and construct barrier-free access ramps, which are work types that we often find sensitive to historic buildings, but can't be approved at staff level. Corey already addressed the issues of the synthetic slate roofing and how the commission has approved this material many times in the past. The proposed windows replicate the configurations and finish of the historic ones, but because of the material change and details not matching, the staff can't approve them. And the concrete barrier-free access ramps with metal handrails are typical of ramps we often approve, but again, because of the multiple switchbacks, the staff can't approve them. So Commissioner Chen, could you start this discussion?
Love to. Yeah, I think as Commissioner Ginsburg pointed out, I think the window detailing, I think, is the key here. I can accept that given the even though the testimony recommended retaining the slate, I think the applicant made a good point about getting the roof warranty, and so I can find that appropriate.
Commissioner Chu?
I would be in agreement with that. I would ask the applicant to look at aluminum clad wood windows that better match the profiles of existing.
Commissioner Jefferson? Okay, Commissioner Goldblum?
Agree with Stephen Chu.
Okay, Commissioner Mahan,
I concur.
Commissioner Wilder,
Agree.
Vice Chair Master,
I agree.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree.
Okay, Commissioner Quimby. Okay, good. Okay, Commissioner Chen, if you could read the motion, and
Read both or just one?
I think you have to read both, sorry.
Okay, right.
Just say the address.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're two
Okay.
different ones.
In the matter of LPC 25-07989, 318 Murray Street, Fort Hutton Historic District. The application is to replace roofing, windows, and doors and construct a barrier-free access ramp. Noting the building style, scale, materials, and detail among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Fort Hutton Historic District, I recommend a positive report with modifications be issued, finding that the proposed work will aid in the long-term preservation of the building, that the deteriorated condition of the historic slate roof warrants replacement, that portions of the roof were replaced with substitute materials prior to the destination of historic district, and the simulated slate roofing will recall the size, texture, finish, and coursing of the slate roofing, that the configuration and the size of the ramp, including extended landing and right angle turn to navigate the tall height of the first floor and the recessed central front facade, will be compatible scale to the building's base, that the ramp, stair, and railing featuring a concrete ramp and painted metal handrails will be simply designed and finished to blend with its context and will have a harmonious secondary presence. That the proposed square-headed single-hung windows will match the historic double-hung windows in terms of configuration and finish. That the proposed large arch-headed fixed windows will have a recessed lower sash simulating the historic double-hung window operation, and will match the historic windows in terms of configuration and finish. That the change in window materials from painted wood to a more weather-resistant cladding will extend the longevity in the marine environment. And that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or Fort Hutton Historic District. However, I find that the details of the proposed fiberglass windows are flat and do not recall the historic window profile, and that the details of the muntins and the brick molds have not been provided. Therefore, I recommend that the windows materials be changed to metal clad or fiberglass clad wood, or otherwise better match to the historic window profiles. And that the window details and including muntins and brick molds be reviewed in consultation with staff.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chu, would you second that?
Second.
Thank you. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Commissioner Savage,
Aye.
Chair Master,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, Commissioner Quimby, Commissioner Jefferson. Aye. Commissioner Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilder.
Aye.
10 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, and now I'll read the second case.
Yes, please. Yeah,
LPC
that's-
25.
You want me to read it?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
It was just a lot. Okay. In the matter of LPC 25-07912, 332 Theater Road, Fort Hutton Historic District. Application is to replace roofing and windows and construct a barrier-free access ramp. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Fort Hutton Historic District. I recommend that a positive report with modifications be issued, finding that the proposed work will aid in the long-term preservation of the building, that the deteriorated condition of the historic slate roof warrants replacement, that portions of the roof were replaced with substitute materials prior to the designation of the historic district, and the simulated slate roofing will recall the size, texture, and finish and coursing of the slate roofing, that the configuration and size of the ramp, including an extended landing and right angle turn to navigate the tall height of the first floor and the recessed central front facade, will be compatibly scaled to the building base, that the ramp, stair, and railing featuring a concrete ramp and painted metal handrails will be simply designed and finished to blend with its context and will have a harmonious secondary presence, that the proposed square-headed single-hung windows will match the historic double-hung windows in terms of configuration and finish, that the change in window material from painted wood to a more weather-resistant cladding will extend their longevity in this marine environment, and that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building or Fort Totten Historic District. I also recommend that the window material be changed to metal clad or fiberglass clad wood or otherwise better match the historic window profiles, and that the window details, including muttons and brick molds, be reviewed in consultation with staff.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Ginsburg, could you second the motion?
Yep. Second.
Okay, and Mark, can you call the vote?
Chair Savage.
Aye.
Vice Chair Master.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu. Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Quimby.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Mann.
Aye.
Commissioner Wilder.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, that's been approved. Please continue to work with staff and thank you. Okay, and let's move to our next item. We're going to still do before lunch, even though we're running quite behind. Corey?
That's item 4, LPC 25-12719, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Staten Island, Block 2286, Lot 18, 48 Manor Court, the Crimson Beach Individual Landmark. This is a Usonian-style house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and built in 1959. The application is to construct an addition, repave the driveway, and legalize alterations to the driveway and replacement of window and door infill at the rear facade without LPC permits.
Okay, thank you. You may begin.
Good morning. Thank you very much to the Commission for spending the time with us this morning. We couldn't be happier to be here today on behalf of a very proud steward of this home, Jean Cretella, who is here. And unfortunately, her husband, Frank, is not feeling well today. This has been their pride and joy since they purchased the home 20 years ago. They have a business that caters exclusively to redeveloping properties that are historic properties. They do it all over the Northeast, and they purchased this home with an eye towards being beautiful stewards of it and maintaining its uniqueness. As I'm sure you're familiar with, I don't know if I can.
Excuse me, could you just state your name for the record?
Sorry, my name is Eric Palatnik. And with us here is Phil Rampula, a planner, and Jean Cretella. And I'm an attorney, and Phil is a planner, and Jean is the owner. Your staff did a phenomenal job, by the way, shepherding us through the process, and we want to give them kudos. The home that you could see here is a Frank Lloyd Wright home. For those who aren't familiar with it, and I wouldn't expect you to be, because it is the only home in the Northeast. Excuse me, God bless you. It is the only home in the Northeast that is a Frank Lloyd Wright home, and it is one of only 3 Frank Lloyd developments in New York City, one of which, of course, is the Guggenheim. The second one, I don't know if it's still there, the Mercedes-Benz dealer in the 50s. I'm not familiar with that. I haven't been there. And this is the 3rd Frank Lloyd Wright edifice in the city. It is the only residential one. It was constructed, if I can go down one slide. Well, I'm going too fast. I need to use the keyboard instead. See if that works. Nope. Okay, go down. There you go. Okay, I got it. This is a view of the home from the front. We're going to call out things that we're doing to the home, as well as give you some interesting information about the history of the home while I'm doing so. The home was constructed in 1959. Frank Lloyd Wright never got a chance to see it. He died before it was completed. It was a prefab home. It was delivered in 3 truckloads. It was one of only a few prefab homes that he did around the country. The home itself was in serious disrepair in the 90s. The current owners bought it at the end of the 90s, where it was suffering from a tremendous amount of water damage. And that's really what's bringing us here for the action today. The home suffers from its geological location in a hillside. Water has been its enemy since it was built. The rooftop, when they took ownership, suffered from more than 300 leaks in the rooftop. They've repaired them all. The driveway that you can see right here in the front is a subject of this action, specifically to the lower left there. Ownership has enlarged the driveway to a T cutout at the lower left side, and I'll show you more pictures of that as we go through it. The reason they have done so is because water was running down the driveway and into the home. You're going to see many more pictures of damage that water has done on the property. So to prevent the water from infiltrating the property, you can see right there in the middle, there's a drain. They went about and installed the drain system and expanded the driveway. To the left, we are here today to legalize that change to the driveway. And we understand that the commission has made some comments that perhaps they'd like to see it as a grass paver area over there, which we are fully on board with, and we like the idea very much. Also in this picture, you can see another action that we're asking you to take, which is to the right where these trees are. That was originally designed as a carport. It is still a carport in the sense that nothing physically has changed to it. It was open on 3 sides when it was constructed. It's still open on 3 sides. The owners use it now as an area to lounge and relax and spend time outside in a covered outdoor setting. So it is still there in its physical, original means. However, it has been changed so that it's now being programmatically occupied. And that's really what a large part of this house and the changes are about. The house, when it was designed, the quote was that it's designed for urban use by a typical United States family. That was the original inception of this utopian design home. Through the years, obviously, America and New York and everybody's version of a home has changed in what they use it for. And obviously, we all need more space now. We have more rooms. The kids have recreation rooms. We have pools now. We have more recreation in a home than we've ever had before, especially since COVID. So really, all we're doing here is making adaptive reuse of the home to A, improve the water infiltration, but B, also make it more programmatically occupiable. I'll scroll down if my light figure can do that. This is the zoning map. Well, the important thing about the zoning map to show you, if I go back for 1 second, is that we are in a natural area. That's important because we're going to come to a discussion in a few moments about the enlargement of the home itself at the rear. The home is designed sort of like a split level ranch where the front of the home is at level and the back of the home, which is down 1 floor, is also at grade. So you can't see it. But the important thing on this page is that we're in a natural area district on Staten Island, and we will be making an application to city planning after this, which will memorialize all of the landscaping that we're doing on the property and will commit ownership to plant the landscaping exactly as we're proposing. And I mention that because we're hoping that you'll agree that the landscaping that we're proposing will shield the enlargement that we're proposing at the rear, which pops up a little bit, and I'll show you that in a second. This is a home from an aerial perspective. You're not really seeing too much more here than I've explained, so I'll go on to the next slide. Okay. This slide gives you a very good understanding for what's going on the property. You could see, first of all, the top shows you obviously original conditions. In 1971, a pool was installed on the property. So what you're looking at right now, this in the lower left corner, you see the picture of the pool there. That area was not there before 1971. And you could actually see also on the lower right corner, you'll see some steps that are going up. You can see sort of a staircase that sticks out a little bit. That was also created in 1971. The area of the enlargement that we're going to be putting the enlargement is in that area on the right side of the lower left picture. There was a wall there. That wall was installed in 1971. I'm going to show you more pictures in a second about what hydrostatic pressure and hillsides do to walls. And that's what became of the wall. But there was a wall that was approved. You could see there at the top there, the LPC historic pool photographs from the LPC report. That was the LPC action taken in the 70s to allow the pool to be installed and allow for a wall to be installed along the side of the pool. That did not hold up very well at all. And that's what's, again, prompting why we're here. Sorry, it's a very sensitive mouse you have here. So give me 1 second. Very sensitive. Okay. I'm going to go back to the front of the home. This is the area that I was talking about where that a Toyota Camry, it is actually, was parked, is the area that's at issue where the flooding was occurring from the front. Rainwater would come down, obviously, it would be a hillside, it would lead right to the house and it would go into the home. By paving the area and creating conduits, ownership was able to direct rainwater into a basin, which was able to collect it instead of the home collecting it. We are completely amenable to any changes you have with the parking area there, so long as we're able to control the water. We would like to use the parking area as a grass area, as you had suggested, because as the family ages, kids come back and family members come back, and it's nice to have people have access to the property with their cars. Okay. This shows you what's going on right now. Again, this is what I described to you before, but I'm just showing you in a little more detail. Specifically in the lower right corner, you could clearly see the carport. Again, nothing has been disturbed. You can see there are curtains behind those shrubbery, and the shrubbery has been installed very nicely, and the landscaping has been done very nicely. Again, the idea is that this space is being utilized by the family as an area for them to lounge, relax, have social gatherings, and things of the like that we'd all have in our homes. I'll go to the next page. Okay, this shows you what we're seeking to do with all areas of our proposal. Now that you're familiar with the home, all areas of the proposal are circled. Two of the areas already are in existence. We're asking you to legalize those conditions. One is the modified carport. Again, that's on the right-hand side. I've spoken about it a few times already. No physical changes have been made. If you were to say you wanted cars to be parked there, nothing physical would have to be done except the trees ripped out. We're hoping you don't say that. We really enjoy the use of the property, the way that it is being used, and it's become a critical part of the family's lifestyle. The lower left circle, the middle circle right there, that's the carport area that the driveway area that was flooding that we spoke about, where a basin has been installed and pavement has been put in to control rainwater. The rear, the top left, is the cellar addition. That's where all the quote-unquote action is happening, and I'll go to that next. Okay, so this gives you, the top right gives you more pictures of what the carport is being used for, but the left is really where all the problems are happening. That left trellised area with the brick, which we saved all of the brick. We have all of the brick, by the way, so we're planning on utilizing that in the reconstruction. We've saved everything. That's what collapsed. And all of that collapsed into the rear yard from the rainwater, from the hydrostatic pressure. And we have more pictures with bowing. Yeah, there's a bow. You could see the bow here in this shot of the wall itself. So you could see that the wall is really taking quite a strain. The right side is what we're showing you with the pavers that we had proposed for the driveway area, but we can come back to that. Good, one more slide here. Is that it? It's not letting me go any more slides. I don't know why. It's not letting me move a slide. Did it go? Yeah, now.
Internet? Internet must be shaky. Yeah. And can we, yeah, check the. Okay.
All right.
Okay, apologies for that.
This happens. It's the way it goes to this. So this area that you're looking at, in the original design in 1959, it was just a hillside rolling down to the pool right here. That's all there was. In 1971, the architect firm, which I'm probably going to mispronounce, Taliesin, which you all probably know much more than I do, which is the successor to, of course, the original architect, and they did the pool. When they built the pool, they had the wall there where you see the glass bifold doors right now next to the triangular shaped extension. We are proposing the glass doors extension and the triangular shaped jutting up, I guess it would be you can call it a little seating area and a dining area and some recreation area for the family. The design, I'm going to let the planner speak to this more in a few minutes. The design was intentional. We have received commentary from the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy about this design on the right that you see. They've stated that they feel it should come off and it should be a lower design and a little less obtrusive. We are agnostic towards it. We really tried to design something that was intentionally noticeable as not being part of the original design, so as not to be fearful of being called a copycat or creating a fake imitation, so to speak. So that's the way the planner was looking at it. We'd be happy to design it in a different way if the commission felt it would be different. It should be different. It is visible from the street, and that was the discussion I was having a few moments ago. The planners had thought that they would shield it from the street so it wasn't visible by plantings that are required as a part of the natural area application that would go to city planning right after this. But we understand that that design element brings it out of your realm and you may not be comfortable with that. So having said that, we are agnostic, like I said a moment ago, and would be happy to either keep it like this, which we very much would like, or if you'd like to see it redesigned, we hope we could redesign it, maybe resolve hearings today and redesign and close hearings on it. But in any event, and the reason I mention that is because ownership is quite eager to get construction going in the fall. So we are very eager to get through this process and get, if we have a winter like we had last winter, obviously you can't do any of this work during that time period, and then they'd be another year out. So that's why I mentioned the timing. That I'll stop presenting here because I think everything else would be best discussed by Mr. Rampula. And I'll answer any questions if you'd like to ask me any questions, but otherwise Mr. Rampula could present.
Okay, we have questions. Commissioner Chen, I think you had yours first.
I have the privilege of visiting this house before with the prior owner. It was, in the Toyota photograph. That was the last time I remember that. It has come a long way. Since you mentioned Taliesin, have you been in touch with them at all? I just noticed that
I'll
the
let you answer
foundation
that.
whether you want to have there, given that this is such a rare building, it's the only residential in New York that, and obviously this is not Guggenheim, but
Hello,
have you
Commissioner.
had a chance to consult with them at all?
No, Philip Rampula, planner, partner, Rampula Associates Architects. No, we didn't correspond with them, but the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy sent us comments.
Okay.
And I don't know if the commission has reviewed those comments, but we have with staff. And one of the comments is, and we showed this two ways, is it just the,
Let's go light on the scroll.
oh, okay. Okay, we showed the front elevation with two different shots. One of them has planting and the other one is devoid of planting. And you can see the top of the roof on the top picture to the left peeking through. We didn't think it was problematic because Frank Lloyd Wright, in a lot of his homes and his buildings, had artwork throughout the different sites. Being as it is, we're in the natural area district. It's a special zoning district where we have to file with city planning for the removal of trees, the planting of trees, and the modification of topography. So the ownership wanted to replant a crimson beech tree, and that's how it got its name. So on the bottom photograph, you see the new crimson beech at about 10 years old. And additional low planting, shrub planting, and we thought that that would soften the look from the public way of not being able to see the top of the roof of the new addition down at the cellar level. Because as you all know, we are at two different levels. It's only one story in the front and it's 2 stories down below. if the commission feels strongly about losing that, we will go with a flat roof that's a little lower. But we thought that it was a good art piece to incorporate through the building. Oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, the mouse is there.
Okay, one more. That's the front. That's a better shot of the carport in the front. Yeah, the parking.
Yeah, I was referring to the, because Frank Lloyd Wright is renowned for his overhang, the roof profile, whether that rear yard addition has been looked at by them.
No, and it was at a different era that he was doing the big roof overhangs, more of the prairie style than anything else, and this is the utopian, so we didn't even go down that road, to be honest with you. We would change this to a flat roof with some type of overhang, because I think it calls for that. The other thing that we're doing to make this not seem as if it's the original fabric is we saved all the brick, and in the report it notes that the horizontal grout lines were actually raked out, but the vertical grout lines are flush with the brick. So we thought that on the new addition, we wouldn't rake out our grout lines, but we would use the brick, and you'll see a difference, because the brick will be the same color, but the grout lines would be different. And we were thinking of an 8 or a 10-inch setback in the plane of the new addition, so that you'll see the original building, and then right where that wall is, if I can get this arrow to go there, that's about where we're going to start, right about there. So we would set that back. We're mimicking the same accordion style doors that are in the original building, which were replaced. And we do have some vertical elements. We would change the planters to the top, because the Conservancy pointed it out that we shouldn't have independent planters like a Wisconsin style house, and we would make them integral to that column to have a planter up there, but not as a separate planter per se. Otherwise, now this doesn't show the whole thing. There's no way of making this wider, right?
I think it's, yeah, it's showing everything that we have in the PDF.
But not what I'm seeing on screen. Just wanted to get to the left. You'd see a little bit more of the existing house and how it fits in. But we'll get there.
Commissioners, are there other questions? Vice Chair Master.
So Phil, I have a question. You said that the wall had water damage and it buckled.
Yes.
So is that wall being repaired and restored, or?
Well, that's where the new addition will be.
Okay, okay.
And
Yeah.
we do have a picture of that.
And then I guess with the change that you're doing to the driveway, will that prevent the water from coming in and doing the same thing?
Yes,
To the,
we'd rather not do the porous pavers, because we're just bringing the water down a little further before it goes out, and it has to go out through piping. We'd rather keep it as a brick paver and change the whole driveway to brick, which was the original intention, and it's shown on the drawings, but they ended up going with asphalt. We would take the recommendation from the commission on that. That bottom left, Vice Chair, that's where the wall was, and that's where it came down. And that's where we saved the brick. So the wall went past those 4 chairs on the bottom, and then it comes towards us. So the wall's an L shape, the existing wall. That part collapsed. And the reason it collapsed, if I can do this. There it is collapsed right there. That was like on a couple of days after it happened. If you look at that bottom picture, you'll see that the corner the mortar is a different color, which means that it was replaced and repaired. And if you take your eye and you run it right down that wall, you see a physical bow in that wall. And that is buttressed by looking at the spacing of the trellis. And then you look at all the trellises, all the pieces of wood, they're evenly spaced until you hit that wall, and then it gets really close. So that bow was coming for a while, and that's hydrostatic pressure. I don't think they had weep holes or stone down there. It just collapsed.
Commissioner Ginsburg?
You said you're going to reuse the brick from the wall, but the wall is not original. It was built in like 1970
So when they did the original house, and then Mrs. Cass went back to Taliesin and said, I'd like to do a pool and that stair addition on the wall. So it was the same architect. It wasn't Frank Lloyd Wright.
Taliesin was the successor, right?
Yes, they did the pool.
But was
addition.
it the same brick as the original house?
I believe it is.
Thank you.
And I don't think we'd ever match it today.
Commissioner Goldblum?
Couple of questions. I'm just concerned about like, where's this stair? It looks to me like you're proposing to keep or rebuild the 1970 stair. Is that right?
No, we're not touching it, it's staying.
Oh, it's staying. Okay, good. So why am I not seeing it in the floor plan or elevation? If you go to the floor plan, cellar floor plan, isn't it there, or shouldn't it be
It
there?
could be on the outside.
We go to the floor plan, which I get is page 21 of 29. Bingo. Is it missing there in the top left?
It is not there.
Okay, and can we go to
Because
the,
it's that, we only did the body of the building on the plan. We
and then if we go to the
didn't do
elevation,
the
like,
wall.
keep on going a few pages down, page 24 of 29, is it also missing there? Top right?
Yes, it is. Well, no, that's it. That's it.
But doesn't it step in profile? Doesn't the top of the wall step in profile?
Yes.
a change.
Yes.
So
We'll
I'm-
correct that.
So it's not there. Oh, so, or it's there, but it's not right.
No, it's not there. It begins.
Not there at all.
Yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check. Thank you. And is the intention of the proposed addition that the new wall of the addition aligns with that or is proud of it?
What do you mean?
In other words, let's go to page 25 of 29, the floor plan, showing the roof, I guess, of the addition. Right, keep on going. Where it shows the proposed addition floor plan. It's in the architectural plans, page 25 of 29 on the PDF.
What page is that? I can't read it.
Keep on going. Go.
That's the existing, right?
Keep on going. I'm just trying to see if it's supposed to be aligned or if it, I mean, I think it's aligned. I just can't tell.
There you go.
There. So the face of the brick stair aligns with the face of the new wall,
Correct.
not including the overhang.
Correct.
Thank you.
And after we got comment from the Conservancy, we thought about offsetting that wall. So that stands out as new.
Huh?
It looks like it's up page of the existing wall.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of confused by, but I think if you zoom in on that corner, it does show it aligning. And that dotted line is either an overhang or a footing or something like that.
I can't see from here. I apologize.
Yeah.
It's aligned now.
Right. So but the project you're showing us is aligning.
Yes.
Page 12 of 29.
That's even better, I think. That shows the stair. and that shows the addition.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just out of curiosity, how's the pool holding up?
Pretty well.
Same water.
Pools get maintenance.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Okay, do we have other questions at this time? Okay, not seeing any. Let's go ahead and move to testimony. And is there anybody in the room that would like to speak to this item? Okay, not seeing anybody. Let's move to Stephen Thompson and Zoom testimony.
Participants on Zoom wishing to speak, please raise your hand. The first speaker will be Historic Districts Council.
This is Emma Bartley speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the proposal largely appropriate. Our only objection is to the extent of paving proposed as part of the driveway legalization. The expanded hardscape diminishes the carefully composed landscape setting and gives this important historic residence an inappropriately commercial character. We encourage the applicant to reduce the driveway paving wherever possible. Thank you.
The next speaker is Victorian Society of New York.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jeremy Woodoff speaking for the Victorian Society, New York. The VSNY supports several elements of this application. The first is the removal of the existing asphalt driveway and the installation of new pavers. However, the applicant states that red bricks were original to the drive. We recommend that the applicant be required to use red brick in this location. We also support the construction of the portion of the extension which will be set into the slope. It appears it will be minimally visible from the street, and the cladding and detailing of the section facing the pool will match the existing lower level facade. However, we find the pavilion with the triangular roof which culminates the extension at the western side of the property, and the use of piers topped by decorative urns at the roof line of the extension, based on a detail from the 1905 Darwin Martin House, are not in keeping with the simple Usonian character of Wright's original design, and both will be seen in conjunction with the primary facade. The designation report for Crimson Beach states that it's an example of the prefab number 1, designed by Wright in 1956 to address the problem of moderate cost houses. They were to be built using prefabricated components instead of more expensive site-built construction. The report goes on to say the prefab number 1 design employed Wright's characteristic Usonian vocabulary with its low horizontal emphasis. We're aware that Crimson Beach has had some alterations. The designation report notes that the swimming pool, the adjacent brick walls, and steps were added in 1970. They were designed by Morton H. Delson, who was selected by Wright to be his East Coast representative. These changes respected the original character of the design. The proposals here today do not. The most notable feature of the proposed western extension, the pavilion's dramatic triangular roof, will be visible from the street. This is shown on image 16. The roof of the pavilion has nothing in common with Crimson Beach or the low horizontal character and simple detailing of Wright's Usonian houses. We recommend that the applicant study the many Usonian houses to develop a more sympathetic design. Finally, we recommend denial of the use of urns set atop the piers, also visible from the street. This detail from one of Wright's early custom design mansions is alien to the character of a Usonian house and should be deleted. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
The next speaker is Vinny Ames.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, if you could please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Vinny Amise. photographer. Should I go?
Yes, you may begin. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. So I was born and raised here on Staten Island, and I've been here for 70 years. And for the last 50 years, I'm a photographer. I've been doing photography for 50 years. I have done work for Historic Richmond Town, the Staten Island Advance, the museum. I'm very, very involved in everything that's going on in Staten Island. I moved to Lighthouse Hill in the early 90s. And when I moved here, my wife actually grew up with the Casses. And when I moved here, Mrs. Cass had sold the house and sold it to a couple who almost put the house in ruins. And I'm here to talk about the integrity of the owners. When I found out they were leaving New York and moving to Alaska, I asked them nicely, please hold off, and I'd like you to talk to Frank and Jeannie Cretella about purchasing the house, because I knew they were very, very, they grew up on Lighthouse Hill, and they were very involved in building, and they basically came in and saved the location. They took hours, countless hours, and many dollars. They redesigned the Philippine mahogany, sorry, the Philippine mahogany. He had to import it and had his guys lathe out the existing. He found one piece of the existing way it was cut. He went out and also did the brick work the way it was supposed to be done. And I think Phil Rampulo was explaining it was inside, it was curved in and curved out on the verticals. There was so much of time and effort that the Gratellas have put into this house, saving the location, saving the house. Also, I found out this morning, Lisa and Paul Myers, who also live on Shefflin Street, their son, Jeremy, just purchased 119 Meisner, which is the White House, and it's another landmark house on the block. So I just want to say there are people up here that really love the neighborhood and really want to see things, see things restored and kept. And I think the addition that Mr. Rampul is speaking about doesn't touch the original house. It's all on the side around a pool that was put on afterwards. Any questions from anybody?
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll move to the next speaker, please.
Thank you.
Andrew Cronson.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Cronson. I'm an architectural historian and recent Columbia graduate. I should start off by noting, regrettably, the Hoffman Auto Showroom, which was at 430 Park Avenue, no longer stands. That was discussed earlier. It was never landmarked, and it was lost with a flick of a pen. Since so few interior designations were approved even back then, why would anyone be surprised that that would go as well? I remember the demolition when I was just entering high school, and this splendid circular atmosphere was replaced with a standardized TD bank. Not only was that a missed opportunity for repurposing, it left only a few right works in all of the city. However, it should be noted there is actually a Franklin Wright work on Long Island in the village of Great Neck Estates, known as the Rayburn House, which is 2 blocks from the Great Neck Station. Perhaps LPC should take a field trip so they can understand what Wright really means today. I've actually visited many times. It's spectacular. Though there was a lot being discussed here, I want to hone in on the addition being proposed, which is changed from an earlier orthogonal iteration which was submitted. There are conflicting ideas of whether to build harmoniously or to make a statement in contrast to Wright. Seeing this was a prefabricated spec.
Mr. Cronson, we can't hear you if you're still speaking.
Frozen.
All right, Mr. Cronson, if you could please just complete your testimony. I think that there might have been an issue with the audio.
Sure, apologies. Brightwork stands alongside UNESCO heritage sites, and the preservation of the highest caliber should be the priority of this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other participants on Zoom wishing to speak? All right, seeing none, I'll note for the record that Staten Island Community Board 2 recommends approval. LPC received letters from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy and Docomomo US New York Tri-State and one individual.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to any of the testimony?
Not particularly. We're showing a willingness to work with the commission. I would put forth and request that the commission vote in favor of this project, and we'll work out the details with staff. We will get rid of the triangular roof and bring it down so it's not seen from the public realm. I think the horizontal feature of where the main room is worthwhile, and I would keep those vertical columns. We'll take the planter off the top, and we'd like to discuss further with staff because there's 3 different ideas of what should happen with the driveway. And Mrs. Cretella would like to say a few words.
Okay. Please just state your name for the record.
Hi, Jeannie Cretella. I'm the homeowner, and I just wanted to let you all know that, my husband and I have grown up not far from this home on the other side of the hill. And it was always a home that we recognized as special, and always a home that we one day, because we've been together since we're 13, so it's many years ago, but it was always a home that we said one day we wanted it to be ours. When the Casses sold it, the time wasn't right. But when the people after the Casses decided, it was time for them to move on to Alaska, they really looked at living in the Frank Lloyd Wright home, I believe, as a bucket list item. And we did everything and anything we could at that point in time to make Crimson Beach our home. And it's been our home for 22 years. We expect it to be our home for another 22 years, and for one day, perhaps, our daughter to have it as her home. There's not a morning that we wake up where we don't say, how lucky are we to live in this house? We recognize how special it is. We recognize how privileged we are to call it our home. But it is our home, and we would love to make these improvements because they're as perfect as the house is. It was built at a time where things change, priorities change. We'd love to add the addition on to the pool area so that we can access it much more easily. And that if we are out by the pool, there's perhaps an area inside where there's a little kitchen. So we just really do not at all want to change the integrity. We appreciate and recognize how important the integrity of the home is. It's been a lifelong dream of ours to call Crimson Beach our home. We hope that any questions you have could be worked out, with a contingency. We're willing to make the changes that need to be. But certain things like the driveway and handling the issues with the water, having the carport a little more private to give us some privacy, especially when our daughter was really young, is just something that I believe that today if Frank Lloyd Wright was sitting here, he'd say, yes, things evolve, and the changes that we're proposing are just that. So I thank you for your time, and if anyone has any questions. although I know my professionals can probably answer much more, but does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you very much. We might still have some more questions. I believe Commissioner Goldblum has a
I just wanted to ask if the SNAD application has been made yet? That started?
It was started. We had a pre-application meeting with the Staten Island Office of City Planning last year. They understood what we were proposing. It was within the area of what was already disturbed, but they said to us, we're putting the brakes on it until you get through landmarks. So they're fully aware of it, and we've kept them abreast.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Master?
Yeah. So to me, it seems like water is one of our most important issues here, and that any change to the driveway, we've really got to think through, how to prevent that from happening again. So, Phil, would you mind going through again, talking about what mitigation efforts you're doing, and that what material is important and what material you would consider inappropriate in terms of controlling the water?
Well, the top is a picture of where the carport ends now, and it is asphalt paving. So we in terms of water, we think for a driveway, it shouldn't be permeable. It should be impermeable so that we can control the water, bring it to one spot, bring it down into dry wells, and let it go back into the aquifer and away from the building. So I'm advocating repaving the entire driveway with brick pavers. We had shown a sample of it somewhere here.
That's okay. I remember what.
And
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
So what you just said is in conflict with what I've always been trained, which is where you have water, you want to use a permeable surface to get the water into the ground so it doesn't become a stream running towards the house because there's no other place for it to go.
Well, you're right, but here's the problem. We have negative pitch towards the house from the street. So everything goes down that driveway and
Right.
ends up against the front wall. If it goes down, in the past, it has seeped through the foundation wall of the cellar. Until he paved that little area to the left, which is what I call the T of the driveway, and back pitched that portion of the driveway to go to a drain that he put into a bank of dry wells that's about 15 feet away from the house. That solved the problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions? Any other questions? Commissioner Goldblum.
Why do you show gray pavers? Are you proposing gray pavers or are you proposing red pavers?
We had proposed black, I believe they were, like black
Are-
or
yeah.
red.
So if the original historic was red, you want the black, why? Is that a good thing?
We're open for change, Commissioner. Hey, we're not stuck on it.
Okay, if there's no more questions, let's go ahead and close the hearing. Vice Chair Master, will you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Wilder, will you second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed. So as we've heard, this is the only Frank Lloyd Wright designed house in New York City. And as described in the designation report, it is the prefab #1 house. So this application has a number of components. At the rear of the building, it is to legalize the replacement of windows and door infill along the basement facade and construct the proposed addition. And at the site in front of the building, to legalize expanding the driveway for new parking area, adding curbs and planting beds in front of the former covered parking area, and as new work, replacing the paving. So Commissioner Chu, could you lead the discussion?
Thank you. Yes, I just want to express my thanks to the applicant for being open to suggestions, because this is a very important house, and the owner has expressed her love for the house, and we appreciate that. As architects, many of us see Frank Lloyd Wright's work as very important, and this being one of the only houses existing, a very precious piece. So excuse us if we are very detailed in our comments. So in terms of what you're asking for in your proposal, there are certain items that I think are of less concern than others from the aesthetic purposes and Frank Lloyd Wright's original house design. I understand the conditions. Let's start with the water issue. I think we all want that to be solved so that the house does not receive further deterioration from water and infiltration at basement levels. I believe that in terms of what you're proposing in terms of pavers, is a possibility. I would like you to consider the brick paver. I think that your comments about runoff and absorption are slightly two different issues. And I do think that the addition of that area that you're talking about on the left, the T shape, probably would help because you've actually changed the topography to have it back drained to a location of a drain, a larger drain towards the center of the driveway. I support that, and I think that the inclusion of this as paved area is appropriate from my perspective, but I do want you to look at the change of material. I do think that the red brick would be beautiful and be in keeping and simplified in terms of the palette. In terms of performance, I'm not quite sure I can see why that is not something you can do currently in this condition. In terms of the carport, it seems that you're just saying the use of the area, and physically it's really the alteration of the inclusion of some planting where there was originally paving that led to the carport. I appreciate the need for the house to accommodate the owner's use and comfort and privacy. I'm okay with this. I think that essentially this change is reversible. It's a planted area where it was paved. I do want to point out that this element was important to the design of the house and the sense of cantilever and overhang, which one of my fellow commissioners raised earlier. The fact that it is an overhang and that sort of open air view was integral to the design of this. And so the overhang aesthetic, I do think is valid in this house design. That being said, I'm okay with the fact that it's being used as a living room outdoor patio and that you have placed some trees in front of it. Now, as we move down to the addition at the cellar level off the swimming pool area. Thanks for whoever's changing those slides. What I can perceive is that the stepped wall was a part of the addition, the original house behind it, and there was a stair inserted in the addition that separated this change of the pool to the original design. And I think that is a very smart and appropriate move to say, here's the existing design, here's an addition, it's stepped away, it's not on the same plane, and in fact, there's a stair inserted there to break the two from each other. I think that was a very successful move. In terms of what you're proposing now is a second renovation to that, as a second step in the evolution of this house. I feel that it's a bit too complicated. I think that I totally appreciate your feeling that the addition should not feel like the original design. However, I think that the proposal could be harmonious with the original design, yet still feel like a different addition. I think you could align with that wall because that element is so small at this point that I think it would be just messier to try to do another move. And in fact, that you have some of the existing brick, keeping that as a very simple plane with a simple opening that accentuates horizontality, to me, is the biggest thing here. I'm not feeling the vertical columns. I think it's quite disturbing. In general, I feel that the addition can be appropriate, but the aesthetics and the impact have to be played down. You've been open to changes. I appreciate that, and the fact that you're saying that the pointy cantilever up roof with the hole in it. Doesn't need to be there. You could flatten it, make it more rectilinear. I think that the house original design is characterized by simple materials, somewhat simple, blocky, planar moves that aren't screaming attention to themselves, could be brought in the addition in a way that's elegant but still very quiet. I would try to keep the lines completely horizontal, nothing popping up like those columns. I don't think that they should even project out the face of the brick wall. That should just be a clean, simple plane. And that could be your addition. The entire L shape could be unified in a very simple move with brick and glass. I think that's very achievable, and your plan is essentially already there. It's just some adjusting to the volume and to the elevations. I do think that Frank Lloyd Wright houses often have hillside terrace engagements. It's common move. So this being a sloped floor that's stepped down, I think, again, I can approve this as a move. I think that when you're on the rooftop and you look at it from the other side, which is the main driveway side, thing I wanted to be sensitive to is, once again, wherever you come and engage the existing house, try to separate them. I don't think the brick wall there should come and align with the facade. I think there's an opportunity to either break it or move it slightly so it doesn't align. In fact, that is a path that you would be continuing to go down the stairs. So that might be an opportunity to actually help with the water issues around the edge of the house and continue this sense of separation from the existing historic original design. Again, I think it was noted before, you can look at some cantilevers, some expression for that piece that is now a triangular point. In plan, it is essentially an L, although an odd-shaped L. The roof can be calmer, and you can separate it, make it slightly taller if you do want from the other volume below it. But again, I do think that in terms of landscape moves, it can be expressive, but it wants to be separate from the existing house in terms of language. Last point, the guardrail. If you look at it from the swimming pool side, I find the guardrail to be quite too obvious and I think stand out in a way that is not at all in the keeping with the original house design. So I would like you to think about other ways to deal with this. Either that be a part of the wall element, singular plane, or maybe set it back further, because it really, to me, it feels very foreign in the language of this house. I think you're almost there. The planning, I don't have many issues with, but I do think that, again, the details are going to be what make this feel like it really is harmonious with this house that I think has been appreciated and very much loved by the owner. Those are my comments.
Commissioner Jefferson?
If we can go back to the plan. I think what you were trying to do is to have a contrast, which is acceptable here. But I think the triangular portion of this plan is difficult to accept in terms of the Usonian house. And I think if that was simplified as a linear L, I think you would be on the right track. I think also the section where you have the triangular pointing upward with the circle in it is also kind of not Usonian and not Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think if you flatten that out, the two volumes will start to work better together. And I think that would be a place to start with the two volumes, one in contrast slightly, but modified, and simplification, you would be in the right track. I think the idea of the courtyard, the red brick landscape, the front of the building is a great idea. I think that would really be a beautiful kind of entry to this, with some planting would be great. I do think that the stair that comes down should be, that the stepping down should be separate and articulated in a way that connects to this new volume and yet said as part of this existing volume. So I think once those conceptual things are worked out, you can then kind of go back to detailing and working it out with staff.
Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think that simplicity and kind of subtlety is the key here. And I think that between Everardo and Stephen, I think that their suggestions are great. Squaring off the triangle, simplifying the fenestration, getting rid of the piers, having this to be much less busy with different window types and window and roof heights and all that stuff, and just making it simple, subsidiary. I think that will result in a much better relationship with the historic building. I do want to note that it's kind of, I wish there were more visualizations of the relationship between the main house and the addition. There were a few that show kind of just like the end of it, but you don't really get the sweep of it. And I think that's really important for us to understand the relationship of the new to the old. And I think that if you do come back, if that's the way this goes, that should be something that you add to your presentation, is a few more renderings that show how the old looks next to the new and vice versa. The renderings tend to just really focus on the new thing with a little bit of the old at one edge. I think it's really important to see them together. I think in terms of the carport, I am fine with it as is. And in terms of the red brick on the driveway, definitely go red. But I think that in the area where you want to extend it, I think the idea of grass pavers is a good idea. I think I've used them on jobs, and they've come out. They do function well, and you preserve much more of the aesthetic of the house in that manner. And I do think that even in the area where you have if you go to grass pavers, you want to keep some a good landscaping buffer in front of the building so that the pavers don't go right up to it or almost right up to it. I think that, you want to try to continue whatever the historic condition was there, keep that buffer going straight across, so that the house kind of sits in green the way it was intended to sit. And I also agree about, lowering that triangular roof. I don't think it's helping you.
Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, there's already been a very thorough analysis by my fellow commissioners. I agree with all of their comments, and I echo Commissioner Goldblum's comments about the presentation, that if this is to come back, additional renderings that have a wider scope, as well as direct comparisons, planimetric and otherwise, of existing and proposed conditions, and even a bit more history of the building itself. I think demonstration of that to the commission would also assist in identifying the right design moves for the applicant themselves. But I do appreciate the incredible passion that came through on the owner and the professionals' part for their stewardship of this important home. We're looking for a high standard here, given the incredible uniqueness of this property. Thank you.
Commissioner Wilder?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I feel that the simplified and I'm okay with the carport.
Vice Chair Master?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the owners for your passion and your dedication to this house. I think we are so lucky that somebody like you and your husband bought this house and restored it in such a loving way, and we really appreciate that. It really came through. Um, so I totally understand what you're saying about you living in this house for 22 years and wanting to remain in this house, and the house really has to meet your needs. And I'm so sorry about the water problems. It sounds like it's been really difficult with all the roof leaks and, the crumbling retaining wall, et cetera. And so for me, it's really important that you solve the water problem. So, whatever, materials, we have to do to make sure that that's taken care of is really important. So I would say, I'm okay if you say that the harder, brick pavers or the red brick pavers, is something that you need for that, in the area that you need it. I'm fine with, that area. I think everyone has kind of said that red might be a preferable color. Um, I think that would probably take care of that. And also in terms of the carport, I think that most of the commissioners have been very supportive of you kind of keeping the planters in front and using it in the way, that fits your lifestyle. And I think the issues is probably, for me, it would probably be the visibility of the triangular roof. And I think you've heard some of the commissioners offer some solutions to that. And, I'll kind of leave it to, the other commissioners in terms of the design elements. But I do want to thank you for your stewardship of this very important house.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I had an architectural history professor in school who talked about you could measure Frank Lloyd Wright buildings' importance by the number of buckets you needed to collect the water. So my commiserations, and I greatly appreciate your wanting to minimize that. In general, I agree with my fellow commissioners. I just have 2 points. One is that when you flatten and square the roof of that addition, it would work well like you've done with the rest as a green roof, so it blends into the landscape and becomes, although you may see a little bit of it, pretty unnoticeable. And then I also agree with Commissioner Goldblum, in addition to the red brick, the area of the parking extension would be better with the grass pavers so that it was more of a green in front of the house.
Commissioner Quimby.
I'm in agreement with the commissioners, and I believe a lot of advice and pointers have been given, and they're very useful. And I also like to thank the applicant for being open to work with the commission and actually to help this building to remain an important landmark. I guess overall, I'm in alignment with the discussion about the brick pavers, also about the plantings in front of the carport. Of course, I agree in simplifying the addition and squaring off the area with the triangular roof, which I believe should be eliminated. I also agree with Commissioner Chu's ideal about making sure there is a difference between the new and the old, potentially planar. So there can actually there can be a distinction, but also keeping it in communion with the existing building.
Okay, and Commissioner Chen.
Last but not least, I just want to echo Vice Chair's Angie Masters' comment about stewardship, that we're lucky to have owners that who care about landmarks, and especially a unique house like this. To Commissioner Ginsburg's comment about Frank Lloyd Wright's famous, he was bothered one time, and he said, "Why are you bothering me? Just bring your umbrella." And that was a comment about the water. I agree with a lot of comments, although I do see an opportunity, even though I'm in the minority here, where the Franklin is renowned for his overhang, whether there's an opportunity, if you want to do something that you think is appropriate and fitting to what Commissioner Chu talked about, I'm not amenable to something, but obviously something different than currently proposed.
Okay, so I think, there's been a lot of feedback, and I know that you're eager to move forward, but I think it's important that you take this in, work with staff on thinking through the recommendations from the commissioners, and then come back. I think we would need to look at this, your final proposal. And, we're here as soon as you could get that done, we can try and get you on the schedule. Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think with that, we're going to move to lunch, right? Okay. s- So this concludes our morning session. We're going to break for lunch. It's now 1:20, and we will return at 1:50 to resume the afternoon session. We will ask all members of the public on Zoom to voluntarily exit at this time. If you don't, you may experience technical difficulties returning to the afternoon session that may arise if we remove you from the meeting.